Japanimation Station.
'Hello and welcome to Japanimation Station, an anime podcast brought to you by Sean Chapman
and Jonathan Lack.
And we are here once again to step into the Grand Tour, the Grand Tour, the Grand Tour. That's right, we're stepping once more into the Grand Tour of anime. And this week on the show, we are wrapping up our Dirty Pair of Dirty Pair episodes of Japanimation Station. Last week we covered the original TV show, all 26 episodes of Dirty Pair. And this week, we are bringing you an absolute smorgasbord of Dirty Pair, because we're basically covering everything other than Dirty Pair Flash. So we are covering the 1985 OVA Affair of Nolandia. We are then covering the movie called over here Dirty Pair Project Eden, just called Dirty Pair in Japan. We are then talking about the 10-episode Dirty Pair OVA series, often called Dirty Pair 2 or Dirty Pair Season 2, and we are also covering the other OVA they made, which is the Flight 005 Conspiracy, which came out in 1990. So just a huge heaping helping of Dirty Pair to cover today, Jonathan.
And all of it is either OVAs or, in one case, a theatrical movie, so it is all, well, other than maybe Affair of Nolandia, like spectacularly animated. Yes. Basically the best Sunrise has to offer. And it's a really interesting, crop of stuff. I would still say, if you were asking me what is my favorite Dirty Pair thing, I think it's just the TV show. I think those 26 episodes. But the OVA, the Dirty Pair 2 series, has a couple of, all-time Dirty Pair episodes in it. So those are often very good. The movie is, I don't know how well it works as, a Dirty Pair movie specifically. But as an animated movie, it is one of the most spectacular things you will ever watch. Oh my fucking god. And then the two feature-length OVAs, the hour-long ones, are, if nothing else, very interesting. For, I think, different reasons, but particularly in the case of Affair of Nolandia. But I'm excited to talk about all this stuff, because it's fascinating.
Yes, it's definitely a more uneven chunk we've got here with the OVAs in the movie. And yeah, I think I generally agree with your overall kind of breakdown there. Definitely Affair of Nolandia is a weird one. We ended the last podcast with me saying and that the second OVA is really the one made in 1990 is really weird. And that was just my brain refusing to accept that Affair of Nolandia was the weird one it's made in 1985. In my head, it's well, the art style's all different. That had to have been the one that was made in 1990. And no, the one I was thinking of at the end of the last podcast was Affair of Nolandia, because it's fucking weird as shit. The movie is the most 80s thing ever created. It is like if you turned Vaporwave into a drug and just injected it into your veins. It does have some weird shit in terms of the story and some of the dirty pairness. The use of Yuri and Kei in that movie I'm often kind of frustrated by, but at the same time it is an incredible film in its own right. The OVA series is a little bit more up and down than the original show, but it's got some really incredible episodes that are as good as some of the best episodes from the original show. And then the second OVA is not the best Dirty Pair thing, but I still like it quite a bit and think it's quite a bit better than Affair of Nolandia.
Well, it's interesting in comparison to Nolandia because if there's a problem with the Flight 005, I think it's too familiar. It's a very,
sure.
You can point to 3 or 4 different episodes of Dirty Pair that are doing kind of the plot of that movie, or that OVA. But it's good. It's a competent version of that. It's just not a mind-blowing version of it.
Yes. But it's just interesting seeing and then also like most of these things other than that last OVA were all made by different groups of people. And so you're getting lots of different creative voices coming through and touching Dirty Pair, and that's kind of what we see here with the chunk that we've got for this episode.
Indeed.
All right, so let's jump in with the history. I've just got a little bit of like at the top here in broad overview of sort of what happened with Dirty Pair post the TV show, and then how we'll tackle this is we'll just go through by each kind of thing we're covering today. We'll do a little bit of history for each thing. And after we do the history for the thing, we'll then cover that, and then we'll move on. So we'll have like a bunch of mini history sections, I think is how today's episode will work. But overall, kind of where we're at with Dirty Pair is we had the TV show, which we discussed last time. And outside that TV show, there's just a bunch of different OVAs and the movie, which we're talking about today. And that's really where in animation Dirty Pair went. Interestingly, this section of the series is also what would get brought over here first in terms of these OVAs. So that original TV show, the first time it came over here is in the DVD set that I watched. And so if you're curious about the history of Dirty Pair in English, it all starts here with the OVAs. So the first OVA we're covering today, Affair of Nolandia, was released with an English dub on VHS by Streamline Pictures on November 23rd, 1994, which is my birthday. My second birthday ever was also when this OVA came out, which is a weird... Lots of things fall on my birthday in weird ways that just, like, there's some coincidences in the universe that scare me. And then you also then had the second OVA, the 005 Flight Conspiracy. That came over here by Orion Pictures on February 21st, 1995. Streamline would also release the movie around that time, but in 1998 to 2000, ADV Films would release all these OVAs again, and the movie, and the 10-episode OVA series on dual-language VHS tapes, and then later re-release these in the 2000s on DVD form. So it's very interesting to me if you have the kind of DVD set that is now out of print, but if you got that when it was still relevant, you do have all these different dubs, and there are multiple English language dubs for a lot of the stuff we're covering today. None of them are good, at least in my opinion. I looked at clips of a bunch of them, and it's like, ooh, yes, these are some like 90s ass era anime dubs, but there's a novelty to it that's interesting. And so that's kind of where the English language stuff kind of comes in a little bit. In Japan during the 90s, Dirty Pair and Animation would then, after these OVAs, transform with a different OVA series we're not covering called Dirty Pair Flash. But if people are curious, here's just a little bit of what Dirty Pair Flash is. So that series was kind of born out of two different things. Sunrise wanted to continue to make Dirty Pair content because Dirty Pair was, a big cult hit. But the author of Dirty Pair, Takachiho, the author of the novels, he wanted to do something different with Dirty Pair. He had this idea of like, let's look at Dirty Pair not just as this one specific series. It is more the concept of these two characters, like these two women kind of protagonists getting into these wacky adventures, and you can transplant that into different forms. And so he wanted to do something different with Dirty Pair. So he wrote a new novel that was its own thing called Dirty Pair Flash with a different concept of what Yuri and Kei and the world they lived in and all that stuff is different, the setting, all that. And he would release 3 of those novels, and they would also make 3 kind of seasons of the OVA series. Around the same time in the mid-90s up to 1999, the 2 leads were recast, which we kind of hit on a little bit last time. Kei's voice actor Tongu Kyoko was kind of semi-retired at this point because she was not living in Japan, although I assumed they would have recast these roles anyways because the whole concept was these are not the Yuri and Kei you know, these are different versions of the character. And one other thing about Dirty Pair Flash is Takachiho specifically was more involved in the production. Like, he wanted to be more actively involved in the production. But Dirty Pair Flash is so much its own thing. I haven't watched them. They have a very mixed reputation in the fan base. We're not going to do a Dirty Pair Flash episode. Maybe someday I'll probably end up watching it. And if I think they're very interesting, maybe we'll hit up that in some distant future, but who knows. There were various other Dirty Pair projects as well. Notably, Dirty Pair has a long life in audio drama, which is one thing I kind of learned in my research. One particularly outlandish one that's really crazy is a series called Dirty Pair 91 that I want to find these audio dramas because it's a series of audio dramas that are written by Takachiho, the original author, but it's part of his idea of you can take Dirty Pair and do crazy things with it, and he reconceptualized it as like a jidaigeki thing of it's set in the past, and they are a pair of kunoichi or female ninja in 1791 in the middle of the Tokugawa shogunate. which is just like a delightful idea. In the interview I read on the Blu-ray booklet that they had in Japan, he does like say like in Sunrise, if you ever want, like I'd be happy for you to animate that. And I would love to see, I have no idea what the stories are. I would love to see like Ninja Dirty Pair. Sounds fucking awesome. And that would be cool if they ever picked up Dirty Pair 91. And I do love that title. That it's Dirty Pair 91, which makes you think, oh, was it a Dirty Pair thing made in 1991? No, it's a Dirty Pair thing set in 1791, which is a totally normal way to title something.
Who were the actors in that audio drama? Is that...
It's a different set.
Okay.
It was... I didn't jot down who it was. I remember, I think it's Yuri is played by Minagawa Junko, who is like on Prince of Tennis and some stuff like that.
Okay.
Maybe she plays Kay. I don't remember. But it's a different pair of actresses who did some of the other audio dramas as well.
Right, because in Dirty Pair Flash, one of them is Rika Matsumoto, the voice of Ash Ketchum in Japan, or Satoshi in Japan. So it's all great voice actors. And the other thing with Dirty Pair Flash is you didn't, like, their character designs are also completely different.
Yes.
You wouldn't know which one is Yuri and which one is Kei by looking at them. So it would make no sense to keep the voice actors around. But yeah, what a weird series history this had. And then nothing has been made in the 2000s, right?
No. And it's a bummer. Like, I hope that it would be cool if Sunrise, in this kind of climate we currently have of where there's so much stuff being remade, like Urusei Yatsura and Ranma 1/2 are both getting remakes. Like Fruit Bucket or Basket got remakes. There's like a lot of stuff getting remade. Obviously, like One Piece is getting a remake while One Piece is still ongoing. If that can happen, surely we could do new Dirty Pair, because I think it'd be interesting to do do the novels or something like that and just adapt them to animation, because none of the novels have ever been adapted into animation. We'll talk about Affair of Nolandia gets the closest in terms of style, but none of the storylines have ever been adapted. So it would be cool for Dirty Pair to come back in some shape or form, because I think you could do cool stuff with it today. But no, the audio dramas are kind of where Dirty Pair drops off. In America, there is like an interesting footnote that's worth bringing up. So, we had those like weird 90s era dubs that we had on the VHS versions and some of the early DVDs that ADV brought over. But then you got the Nozomi Entertainment through Right Stuff releases, which is what I have watched these on, that these are now out of print, but they're like the best way to get them if you can get them over in English. And they released everything. The original show, which is the first time the original show was ever released in America, was on these DVDs. And then they had the OVAs, the movie, all that stuff, all on one DVD set. And those released between 2010 and 2011. So those are like, if you want to get these on physical, that's the best way to do it. Though again, they're very, very out of print. But in 2021, Nozomi Entertainment began a Kickstarter to do a Blu-ray release for the show in America. With a brand new English dub, including actors who are involved in the old dubs. Like, obviously, an English dub thing is not a thing I care about, but it's cool that they would go to the effort to say, let's bring back some of these actors, including one of whom had retired from voice acting, but they brought back. The campaign did meet all of its goals. It hit $731,000, which is a lot of money for a Dirty Pair thing in America. Like, that's kind of wild that it could make that much. The project has taken a long time, in large part because Right Stuff sold to, or, Crunchyroll bought Right Stuff. And so there's like a lot of stuff going on there, but it is still active. So they have continued to update. There are like episodes that they've released to backers and stuff like that. So hopefully that sees the light of day eventually. So that way, if people want to get Dirty Pair easily and don't want to have to pirate it or pay out the butt for a set of DVDs on eBay or something, hopefully one that day that will be possible with an English language release.
Indeed. I should just say, I've been watching these from different torrents because I was trying to find the best versions I could, and I kind of had to cobble them together myself. I wish I had a good rip of the Nozomi Entertainment DVD, because I bet that looks the most right. What I wound up watching, because I couldn't get a good rip of that, was the Japanese Blu-rays. The Japanese Blu-rays for Dirty Pair, like a lot of Sunrise Blu-rays, are very hit or miss. Sometimes they are too aggressively denoising, and then there's been a problem with fan torrents a lot of the time denoise them even more. Yeah. So it kind of kills a lot of the detail in the image. But I thought for the TV show on balance, it was fine. if you can, again, get an actual rip of the Blu-rays and not a fan master that's like denoised them, those look a lot like the different Sunrise masters of like Zeta Gundam, Double Zeta, anything from the 80s, where like not as much grain as I would like, but not so degrained that you kill all the detail. The movie on the Japanese Blu-ray looks phenomenal. It's like kind of perfect. It's like probably degrained a little more than I would do, but I also think that movie was probably shot in such a way that it had a very fine grain field to begin with. So it just looks like really, really good. The OVAs, both of the feature-length OVAs and the Dirty Pair 210 episodes, I thought the Blu-rays looked bad of, and I watched good rips I had of the Nozomi Entertainment DVDs, and those are kind of perfect, other than they still have the tape marks on the bottom for edits, because I guess those were made assuming you would have overscan on the TV, and so on an actual like TV now, that looks a little awkward. But other than that, like the grain pattern and colors on those are really strong. So it kind of depends, and we'll see what masters Nozomi Entertainment uses when they put out these Blu-rays. I hope it's just untouched versions of the Japanese ones, because that would be okay. Although, again, for the OVAs, they look a little bad, I think, because they're so denoised.
Yeah, I'm very happy that I have those DVDs. They look very good. Like, the only one is I do think, like, the movie is the one where you kind of wished it had, like, a really nice restoration. Although there is something about the slightly, like, vintage vibe it is lent by the DVD quality that also feels appropriate. It gives me the feeling of, you know, watching my VHS tape of the 80s Transformers movie, which is like my most prized VHS that I have. It's that in my just recording of fucking Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla that is basically unwatchable because how much I watched it as a kid. But yeah, the movie is the only one on the Nozomi Entertainment release that, like, I feel like a really good Blu-ray version would be better. But the TV show and all that other stuff I think looks really good on those DVDs.
Because that's like, I would say they're very similar masters to if you've seen like the Dragon Ball Dragon boxes or the Loop on the Third Part 2 DVDs, that era of anime restoration that was pretty well done, like that the studios knew what they were doing. So yeah, and the movie is the one that like is clearly, because I've seen the DVD rip of that has the most like compression issues too. So, and it's just clearly an older master than what they used for the TV shows. So it's an interesting history with all of this stuff on physical media. But I hope we get it out in English again one day. Because also, we didn't talk about this, you can technically watch the 26 episodes of Dirty Pair, the TV show on Crunchyroll, but they are inexplicably cropped to a non-standard aspect ratio that looks like about 1:6 to 1 to me. Not 1:66, which is what the movie is, that's European widescreen. Not 1:78, which is your TV. So, like, it's not the worst cropping, but it is the weirdest cropping I've ever seen.
Yes, it looks like an accident. Like someone put in the wrong number somewhere and just nobody caught and addressed it. You know, because to be fair, I can't imagine there's a lot of people watching Dirty Pair on Crunchyroll. I can't imagine that's not their like biggest fucking bringer of new viewers and stuff. But it is weird that is how it is being presented. Like, I would be able to accept, I would be frustrated, but I could accept if they cropped it to be 16:9, because that's a thing that people do. They're criminals that do it, but they fucking do it all the time to 43 TV shows. But this weird in-between no man's land aspect ratio, it's very bizarre.
You know, it's like the difference between murdering someone outright and leaving them dying on the floor in a warehouse or something, right?
Exactly.
It's like, you know, I at least understand it's not good, but I understand the murder. Why are you torturing the guy? That's what it feels like they did to Dirty Pair.
Exactly. Dirty Pair does not deserve it because Dirty Pair is very good, even if the first Dirty Pair OVA is very, very weird. And that will be our segue into talking about Affair of Nolandia, the original Dirty Pair OVA, because this truly is the original Dirty Pair OVA. This came out alongside the TV series. This predates the 20 episodes 25-26 release. So Affair of Nolandia, it was originally released on VHS and Betamax, because again, we're very much in the world of the 80s, and Betamax is a thing, and it was really originally released on those two formats on December 20th, 1985, which is almost exactly when the original TV show finished airing with episode 24. So you are totally concurrent. The production of this would have been concurrent with the original TV show. The Laserdisc release came out May 21st, 1986. Notably, with the Laserdisc version, there were various changes and improvements to the animation, because if you watch Affair of Nolandia, you will notice that there are, let's say, gaps in the animation quality that are still there, with the Laserdisc version, which I just assume is the version of record that if you watch it today, like, I did not find anything that specifically said that the Nozomi Entertainment release was the Laserdisc version. I just assumed that to be the case because it would be insane if it wasn't. The one thing in particular I found that was like specified, because I couldn't find a thing that like gave me a list of what the changes were. The only thing that was specific was them saying that Yuri's face specifically was like made to try to be more on model, which I find remarkable because I still think it's really off model a lot of time in the movie or in the OVA. And so it was very funny to me because I watched it, or I rewatched it before I looked up anything about it. And it was one of the first things I saw was, and in the Laserdisc version, they made all these corrections, including Yuri's face. I'm like, well, you know, they maybe got more of the way there. I'm curious what the absolute original version of this was. Interestingly,
like the other thing is, though, I think it's funny they said Yuri. The one I noticed while watching more is that Kay's neck is too long. There's a lot of shots where Kay looks like a fucking giraffe. Like she'll be standing next to Yuri and like her neck will encompass Yuri's whole head. And I'm like, it's a very weird thing where it's both that they have radically different character designs than the show, and those character designs are frequently off-model by their own standards, which creates like two layers of dissonance, I feel like. Especially like imagine if you watch this contemporaneously, the TV show is finishing airing, you're like, oh, cool, I get to go to the video store and get new Dirty Pair. Then it's like, why is Kay a giraffe now? Oh my god.
Yes, and what is going on with Yudi's face?
Yes.
It's very strange. This OVA did get a theatrical release. It was released in theaters on August 1986, alongside one of the Vodham's OVAs. The thing I read didn't specify which Vodham OVA it was, because there were a lot of those. So that's either The Last Red Shoulder or The Big Battle. But this was a thing that Sunrise did a lot in the 80s, or like lots of anime companies did in the 80s, where they had their sort of not quite feature-length OVAs, and they would just do double feature presentations with special screenings. So that was also one way you could have seen it if you were in Japan in 1986. In terms of the production here, it is, obviously we're still talking about Sunrise. All Dirty Pair stuff is made by Sunrise. The director and storyboards for this were by Okuwaki Masaharu. He's not a director that I found a lot of particularly interesting credits for. The main thing he worked a lot on is Anpanman, like lots of directing episodes of the Anpanman series, which is like a very popular kids show in Japan. The script for this one is Ito Kazunori, who's one of the big writers from the original show. He wrote episodes 1, 3, and 13. We've talked about him a lot, right? This is the guy who worked with Oshimamoru on a bunch of stuff like Ghost in the Shell. And also, I will always note this when he comes up, is that he's also the writer of the Heisei Gamera trilogy, because that's just cool. But character design, it is still Dokute Tsukasa, who is the character design and chief animation director. I didn't find a credit that actually said chief animation director for this, because the credits on this one are a little weird. But I assume he probably was. But he is that role for everything Dirty Pair. Not for Flash, but for all of this version of Dirty Pair, he's on all of it. So even though they changed the character designs, he is still the character designer. Art director for this one, Nakamura Mitsuki and Miura Satoshi, and then music was by Kunimoto Yoshihiro, another person who didn't have a lot of notable credits that stood out to me. I also think this is like the least interesting music that any Dirty Pair thing has.
It's way more in the realm of like Dragon Ball GT and the Yu-Gi-Oh show we watched, where it's like, oh, this is like bad electronic music that sounds like an AI could have made it. And Dirty Pair music usually has so much energy. Like this back to back with the movie is a trip, because it's like polar opposites in music quality.
Yes. And so that's the staff or the stuff comprised of the production, because of course that is what the OVA tells you, is that there are no staff on this movie. There's only the stuff. Because it is the most hilarious misspelling in the history of fucking anything. Is you get to the credits and just the word stuff appears on screen, and then and you're like, what? And then a bunch of people's names start scrolling up. You're like, oh, you mean staff. But yeah, it's interesting to me that obviously, other than the writer and character design here, it does feel like you have kind of like this. I don't want to be mean, but it feels like the B team comes in and is making this, while the A team is making the TV show. Like most of the people involved in this production, other than the writer and the character designer, are not people who are also on the TV show, which makes sense because the people making the TV show are making the fucking TV show. So it's like they can't make the TV show and this at the same time. But Affair of Nolandia is definitely it's a very mixed bag. There are like things about it that are interesting, but the production is so a mess, where there are sequences of it that are really remarkably animated, but there are large sequences of it that are like the worst looking thing kind of in Dirty Pair. And it's a very jarring kind of production, I think.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. I also think, I mean, we can talk about how it has a very different tone and style and all of that. I also think between this and Flight 005 and the two-parter in the original series, I do think Dirty Pair doesn't really work when you go beyond 22 minutes. I think there's some, at least in like its sunrise form, there is something about that very focused, down to business, like 22-minute story form that the Dirty Pair 2 OVA also goes back to, that if you're going to do something longer than that, I think you have to do something radically different. And I think the movie does that best because it does just do something radically different. Like it is, like stylistically, how it is edited, how it is telling its story, everything about that is like very different, and I think arrives at its Dirty Pair-ness very differently. I do think and I think Affair of Nolandia suffers from this more than Flight 005, but both of them do feel like there's really harsh shifts where the story has to go from, like, the first 20 minutes of Affair of Nolandia is this very trippy, there's a lot of dream sequences, you're not sure what the reality is. The second 20 minutes is the sort of adventure with Min-Mei, where they're trying to figure out, like, first they have their whole thing where they just decide to goof off for 3 days, so she'll approach them, and that's very funny. And then you have the stuff with Min-Mei. But then the last 20 minutes is a big chase that feels very disconnected from, like, the narrative style and everything of the rest of the 60-minute thing. And so it sort of feels like 3 Dirty Pair episodes loosely connected, but not really. And I do think, like, when you push out of that, like, 22-minute zone, it starts to break down. And you can even see in these how they're kind of breaking them up into those chunks anyway. It's interesting.
Yes, I would broadly agree. I don't think I have particularly that problem with the second OVA with the Flight 005 Flight Conspiracy. Well, obviously, we can talk about that when we get to that one. I do also want to note that you kept on calling the girl Min-Mei. Her name is Misni, because Min-Mei is the girl from the original Macross, is Lin Min-Mei.
I have my Lin Min-Mei poster up right here from the Do You Remember Love movie, and I walk by every day when I wake up and see Min-Mei in katakana there, and that is probably why I said that. I apologize. It is Misni. But also, she's not much of a character, so forgive me for not remembering.
Yeah. So, yeah, let's just, get into it with this one. I think I could find precious little in terms of, like, actual background information on this one. Like, it's, like, kind of not even really addressed in the booklet, the Blu-ray booklet, which has a lot of good interview content, which is where I got most of my behind-the-scenes stuff I learned, was just reading that booklet, because it's very long and has lots of interviews with people involved in the production. Like, nobody involved in this was interviewed, like, nobody kind of really brought it up. So I don't know any specific behind-the-scenes information, but just watching it, it is patently obvious that the thing they are trying to do is make something that's a lot closer to the books. And if you read reviews of it online, particularly in Japanese, like, that is the main split you see, is that there are some people that really like this one, mostly because they are fans of the book, and they like to see some of the things from the books put into animation, which the TV show does not do, right? The version of Dirty Pair that we're familiar with does not have a lot of the specific things that the books do that this brings in. So, like, some of those specific elements, like the tone of it and the kind of style of it, is more classically what I would kind of call sci-fi. It spends more time discussing the, like, technology and the setting and stuff like that. There's a lot more detail put into that of this than there typically is in Dirty Pair, which that's obviously, like, a thing from the novels, partially because that's, like, the whole thing that the author of the novels is, like, a hardcore sci-fi dude. Even if they're very silly, there is still that sense of the setting, and there's clearly they're, like, trying to do that. The designs are trying to be a lot closer to the Yasuhiko designs from the books. They're not necessarily exactly those designs, but they are hearkening to those designs. They're clearly not trying to make them look like the characters from the TV show that, again, is airing at the same time. The design of the ship, the Lovely Angel, is notably different in this, and it looks different than it is in any other Dirty Pair thing. And from what I understand, it's closer to what the book describes, because it's notably a lot bigger than the Lovely Angel as a ship is typically depicted in these shows. Yuri has a bunch of her gadgets that she has in the books, most notably the bloody card, which is her playing card she throws. There's a couple of other references to it and some of the other things we watched for this episode, but this is where it prominently features that. It also has their, like, precognitive power thing that they have in the books, where they have like the ability to have like this sort of like mild insight into the future, where there's like this weird thing they have at the very beginning of the episode where they have some sort of inkling of something's going on. And then even the actual full title of this, well, it's typically just referred to as it's the Affair of Nolandia. In Japanese, the full title is Dirty Pair no Daishobu Nolandia no Nazo, and Dirty Pair no Daishobu is like the great competition or the great battle of the Dirty Pair, if you want to translate that. But all of the novels are titled Dirty Pair no Dai something, Dai Boken, Dai whatever, Dai Gyakuten, right? So it is clearly trying to position it as this is the Dirty Pair from the books brought into animation. It is not an adaptation of any of the books, to be clear. The plot and all of that is totally original, but it is very obviously trying to bring the book stuff into animation. And having only read like the very beginning of a couple of the books, I cannot like speak to how well it does that. But I definitely think for me, the end product, regardless of what it's trying to do, I think it is both not the Dirty Pair that I'm particularly interested in with a lot of the choices it makes, but even beyond the like, what do I want as a fan of the Dirty Pair anime? I just think like as a production, it's kind of a big mess in so many different places.
Yeah, and I mean, the thing is, I don't hate it. Like, I don't think this is bad. I think there's a lot of good stuff in this. Like, and I like, to some degree, each of the sort of three sections of I keep wanting to call it a movie. These are effectively movies. They're 60 minutes is feature length, but the OVA, we'll call it, to differentiate it. But I like each of the three sections. Like, my favorite section is probably the first, where we're just getting to know about the planet. And I think the whole idea that you keep having Kay get into these weird, sometimes very psychosexual dreams, like the one where it looks like she's just walking through a colon, like she's doing a colonoscopy. It's so weird. But she keeps having these dreams that sort of, they enter in moments where we don't expect a dream, and then she wakes up and time has like worked in a weird way, and there's just a lot of like uncertainty about what we're watching. Is it real? It feels a lot like a good Star Trek episode of like the original series or Next Generation, where like they land on a planet and something weird starts happening and you have to figure out what it is. But that gets tossed by the wayside once the Misney stuff really begins. And then the Misney stuff is kind of interesting because it's the Dirty Pair having to figure out how to triangulate around this powerful little girl. But then once she's like kidnapped and we have to get the bad guy, then it's a more standard Dirty Pair chase thing. And it's a pretty good version of a standard Dirty Pair chase thing. But like, I don't feel like I get a full meal out of any of the things this movie is trying to do. And then the sort of tonal and stylistic inconsistency, I think all of those things could be fully articulated if this OVA was any one of those three things for an hour. But I think when it is effectively three different things, you know, chunked up, I don't think you ever get to see the tone style that it's going for here really fully articulated, and that's the problem.
Yeah, and I like the Star Trek comparison you're making because, yeah, I definitely agree that that's the part that I like the most is that opening section, because that's where you get that thing that you do definitely feel more in the novels, that there is more of a, like, we're trying to make it sci-fi. It's crazy and kind of pulpy, but it is still very sci-fi in style. And even just in the little bits of the novels I read, you see that there's that difference that the anime typically did not do as much. A little bit here and there, but just not as much. But yeah, I think I think the OVA just has a hard time sort of figuring out how do you carry through any of these ideas and like evolve the where the plot is going, but keep that kind of kernel of what you had at the beginning and have a through line from the beginning to the end. And I think part of the problem with that is I just think that this one does not have a particularly good version of Yuri and Kay. Kay in particular, I just think gets so lost in the mix in this, where she has those visions, which are like very strange, but it also like it makes Kay very passive. Like she is constantly like scared and kind of cowering for the first half of this thing. She does very little actively in the story. And so Yuri is the one who is really there pushing the story forward. She's very proactive. She's doing all these different things. And so the balance between the two characters to me like totally collapses in this. And it's very frustrating, especially as like for me, like Kay is my favorite character of the Dirty Pair. She's my favorite. And it's just very annoying to see her take such a heavy back seat, because even when you get into like the big chase at the end, she's just fighting the goon. Yuri is the one who's actually chasing after the bad guy, right? So there's just this constant sense that Kay is always playing second fiddle. And I wonder if that's partially because if you're adapting the books, in the books, she's the POV character. And I think it is easy to interpret the POV character in something like that as feeling very passive, because that's a very novelistic style. We talked about this on our purely academic podcast recently with The Great Gatsby, that this is a difficulty with adapting The Great Gatsby, is you have this POV character, Nick Carraway, that when you're adapting it into a movie, you need to understand that, like, the way you perceive a POV character in a written text versus how you see them on animated media is very, very different. And I don't know if this is exactly what the problem was, but it does feel like there is something about we are trying to keep it closer to the books, and also Kay feels very passive and in the background and very reactive compared to Yuri. That feels like those are maybe two things that kind of come together, and it's just a failure with how to figure out how to make Kay an equal partner in the overall structure of like what she's doing in the story.
Yeah, I think that feels right. There's like, I don't know if I was that cognizant of it while watching, but something about the balance, which is so key to the like Sunrise TV version of Dirty Pair, just felt off in a way that it doesn't usually feel off. I feel like the show is usually pretty good in all of these versions of balancing the two, usually with a slight preference towards Kay as your center of gravity, and something about it felt off here.
Yeah. But then you do also, you have the production stuff where you do have instances of animation that are remarkable. Like, I do think a lot of the action is really well done, but then you do also all of a sudden have like a Scooby-Doo or Flintstone sequence of them running through the woods, and it looks like the same like 8 fucking frames of animation on a cycle with just a rolling background. And there is just such an insane whiplash from, here's this amazing shot of Yuri firing a fucking rocket launcher at this plane and exploding, and oh my god, it looks so good. And then you're immediately thrown into something that like looks like it would be more at home in like the 1960s Dororo show than it is at a 1980s like premium OVA production. And there's just something about that quality of Affair of Nolandia that's really weird. I don't feel like I've ever seen an OVA, especially from this era, that has this problem. And I suspect it's just because they probably just did not have enough people and time, because they're trying to do it at the same time as the TV show. Obviously, Sunrise was doing a lot of stuff in the mid-'80s. And so I don't know if like it's just they couldn't get the kind of oxygen that the production needed. But it is really weird how harsh that shift is and how quickly characters go off model and stuff like that in certain shots. But like, usually I'm able to kind of look past some of that stuff a little bit more easily, but I found it very distracting in this.
Yes, I think it is. Inconsistent is probably the word of the day in the case of this OVA. Although it does have an absolutely hilarious ending because of the credits that start with stuff and cast, spelled out in English. It's the stuff and the cast. Why did we kill the Weekly Stuff podcast, Sean? That would have been a perfect thing to put at the end of all our episodes going forward. And then the weird text at the end, the Dirty Pair will return, is see you next volume again. Bye-bye. And I love it so much.
Yes, it's so weird. Just the formatting of the text, which in my notes I tried to reproduce as faithfully as possible. Because yes, it's all caps in one line, see you next. Then below that, it's indented an awkward number of times to be like a little bit in line with next, but not quite in line with next. And it's volume, ... exclamation point, question mark. Then it's another line below. It's indented multiple times again, and it says, again! And then it's back down, and then back in line with volume it's in lowercase text, bye-bye, ... It's just like, it feels like someone fucking got high and is texting you. You know, they're halfway through texting you, they forgot what they were texting about. Because bye-bye ... just feels weirdly ominous in English to me. Like there's something about that ellipsis at the end that really hangs. But and it's interesting when you think about I'm curious what they intended to mean when they say "see you next volume?" ? Because you would have the episode 25 to 26 OVA, which I'm guessing that probably would have been greenlit by the time that this would have come out at least. because, with the timeline of some of that stuff, they would maybe have known that VAP was going to want to actually make those 2 episodes and stuff. I don't know, because that is in the chronology. That would be the next Dirty Pair release, would be the 25-26 OVA, but I have no idea what they intended. I don't know if
that would be the next release. The movie is in between those, though. So it would go this, then the movie in theaters, then in January 87, the last 2 episodes on the VHS called the Great Adventure of the Dirty Pair, or whatever they called that. And then you would go into the Dirty Pair 2 OVAs. So, yeah, who the hell knows? There's a lot going on. What a whiplashy run that you get 24 episodes of the TV show. Remember that episode 24 is one of the weirder episodes with the, serial killer and all that.
Yes.
That goes off the air. Then you get Affair of Nolandia. What the fuck is this? Then you get the movie, which is just its own radical, cup of, can of worms. Oh my god. Then you get the, you go back to the style of the TV show for 2 episodes, and it's a stylistic finale to that. Then you jump into Dirty Pair 2, the OVA, which is, structurally in line with the show, but is stylistically fairly different. I just think it's hilarious. If you were doing this as it was coming out, it would be so confusing.
Yes, in all these different formats, yes, it is. You are bouncing all over the place. But there's something about that "See You Next Volume?" that makes me wonder if potentially at Sunrise there was an idea of maybe we would do more of these Dirty Pair but closer to the book style things and have that exist in OVA. That's the feeling that "See You Next Volume" implies to me. I did not, to be clear, see or find anything that indicates that that's the case. But there's something very strange about the way that all that's formatted. We do have a pretty good guest cast for this, even if I think the characters are not particularly well used, these guest characters, but you've got a lot of notable actors here. So Mizny, our little psychic girl, she is voiced by Han Keiko, who's Lala Soon, our little psychic girl in Gundam. She's also Luna, not psychic, but a little cat in Sailor Moon, and I guess a girl cat. I don't know if the gender of Luna matters.
Cats in Japanese are usually men, but they're voiced by women. That's the weird thing in Japanese animation with cats.
Well, you do have Artemis, who is a boy cat, even though Artemis is a girl god in Greek mythology. And so I think the implication is that Luna is the girl cat. I don't know, because Artemis is voiced by a boy. So Artemis feels very coded male, but who knows? But Han Keiko is Mizny. Mizny is a real nothing of a character. She seems like she'd be very interesting, and it's obviously a good voice to get for the character, but you don't get much time to hear that voice really on the characters.
Yeah.
She's such a element in the plot more than she is a character, which is a shame. You do also have Ginga Banjo, who's been in Dirty Pair before. He is Girgis, who is the cyborg guy, who I don't know if he's not as clearly straight up, this is just the Terminator, but he's just Terminator enough that I think it is another Terminator reference. He obviously Ginga Banjo in a billion things, Gear and Sabi in Gundam. I just didn't bother to list all the other things. He's in everything. The one name that I was very happy to see, because it's just a name that has some interesting credits we've talked about on our Grand Tour before, is Fujita Toshiko. She plays Samada, who is the security chief lady. That this is the only guest character that I think kind of stood out to me in this one, where she is trying to sort of get the Dirty Pair off the trail early on, and then eventually she has a sort of crisis of conscience, realizing what they have been doing with experimenting with creating this artificial life, and so ultimately she decides to help the Dirty Pair. That is I think a character that works pretty well. And this actress we've talked about before, she is Husky in Dragon Ball. Not a notable character in Dragon Ball, but she's the weird 80s Fist of the Door star lady that tries to steal a Dragon Ball from Goku in one episode that I like. But she's more notably Taichi in Digimon Adventure, the main character of the original Digimon show. Mamiya, who's one of the main characters in Fist of the North Star. But we specifically talked about her because she's the lady who sang the opening to the original Dororo anime when she was 18. And it was funny when I saw that name in the credits, I was like, I definitely recognize that, but I cannot remember. I looked that name up recently and went into weird detail looking into her history, but I don't remember what it was. And yes, that's right. It's the lady that sang Dororo, and she was in this too.
That's amazing. I had no idea, but I liked the character, as you say. I think the most interesting of the new characters in this. There's some good tension around her, but it's a good performance. I would not have imagined she was the one singing Hogatara, Hogatara, Hogatara Pon.
Yes. Yeah, but it's a very small world on our grand tour. I just like all these very random names that pop up multiple times in these productions that have absolutely fucking nothing to do with each other. It's just, there's only so many people working in this industry, and they end up there's weird coincidences all over the place.
Indeed.
All right, anything else you want to say about Affair of Nolandia before we move on to a very, very different thing?
No, and let's move on because I'm champing at the bit to talk about Dirty Pair Project Eden, the thing I am most excited to discuss today.
Thanks for listening to Japanimation Station. If you're enjoying the show, please remember to like and subscribe, leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, and tell your friends.
You can also find us over at the Purely Academic Podcast, our potentially educational variety show where we talk video games, movies, TV, and more every month. And you can read my movie reviews and follow everything we release together on the Fade to Lack Substack at www.jonathanlack.com.
And now, back to the show. So Dirty Pair Project Eden, also just called Dirty Pair in Japan, or you could call it Dirty Pair the Movie if you want, but the title very notably just says Dirty Pair all over the place, which is not confusing at all, I'm sure, for the audience that here's all these things that are just called titled Dirty Pair. Let's talk a little bit about the history of this movie. I've got a little bit more for this than I do for the other things, because there's a lot more about this in that booklet I had. So a lot of this information I have comes from Katsuyoshi Yatabe, who is the unit director of this movie, and then he became the director, the overall director for the OVA series they make afterwards. So he was the guy interviewed in the booklet that I had scans of. So he was selected to be unit director before the director role was actually finalized. So he was in the meetings with the producers and stuff where they were trying to pick who was going to be the director. And ultimately, their search for the director of the movie went down to two candidates. One was Takizawa Toshifumi, who was the chief director of the original series. He is also the guy who would then later make the 005 Flight Conspiracy OVA. And then the other candidate was Mashimo Koichi, who was a prominent director at he was a prominent director who had worked with Sunrise a lot. He was actually at Tatsunoko, kind of full time. When the producer laid out the planned budget and schedule for the movie, Takizawa said, well, this would be a very tight production. He's like, that's not enough money, and that's not enough time to make this movie. But Mashimo, according to Katsuyoshi, just said, yeah, I could do it. And so they're like, sure. And then they gave Mashimo the job. And that is kind of his accounting of how that went. Just like, he said that Katsuyoshi was clear, the schedule and budget for the movie was extremely tight, and it was an incredibly difficult production. That Mashimo, because he was just like, sure, fuck it, I'll make that movie, whatever. That's why we got that job. Apparently at Sunrise at the time, there was a saying that, quote, when Mashimo passes through, grass doesn't grow, which is a very, intense way to describe your director, but basically meaning that, productions under him were very, very difficult because he was a perfectionist. This is a thing that's very obvious in watching the movie, but this is a movie that I think prioritizes animation above all else. And that very much is the attitude that Mashimo has, according to Katsuyoshi in these interviews, because he says that Mashimo was incredibly particular about who he had animate on the movie, and he's very, very protective of those animators. So it led to very, very high quality animation, insane, they do some fucking insane shit in this movie, some really audacious animation, not just it's well executed. The concepts that they do in some scenes are crazy. And that made what was already a very tight time budget and money budget that made it even more difficult. Because the movie was running behind schedule and so many animators at Sunrise were occupied with other projects, Mashimo and the producers brought in a lot of animators from outside the company that worked on the movie. And a lot of them were kind of big up-and-coming animators, people who had not been in the industry for a long time but had really, really high-quality work that they had done. And so as a result, the majority of the staff of the film had not actually worked on Dirty Pair before. So this is a very different production crew that had been involved in anything with the TV show. Katsuyoshi's interview is packed with lots and lots of wild stories. This is a dude who clearly likes to talk because on that booklet, they interview a bunch of different people. It's a long thing that I got scans of. But most people, it's here's a question, and then here's 4 sentences as an answer. This guy's here's a question, and here's an entire page that is just his answer. It just goes and goes. Some of his answers, I maybe question how, true they are. There's that sense of, when you read something from someone who's told these stories over and over again, it's probably, exaggerated things. So I've called out some stuff that I was fairly skeptical of, but some of these stories are too good. I put in here. You'd maybe take some of these with a grain of salt, but I just find these very funny. So one thing he talks about is there was a mangaka, Asahara Yoshito, and he's the guy who designed the monsters for the movie. So he had this big manga that was popular at the time. They brought him in to make the designs for the crazy monsters for the movie. When they arranged for the meeting with Asari, Mashimo was 2 hours late to that meeting, which is a fucking nightmare. And when he arrived, Mashimo apparently looked at Asari and said, "Are you okay? You look tired." And Asari had replied that he hadn't slept in 2 days because he was so busy. Katsuyoshi is just describes how fucking mortified he was that this dude who hadn't slept in 2 days because he was a super in-demand mangaka at the moment because manga had gotten so big. And Mashimo, the director, was 2 hours late to the movie, or to that meeting, and let that dude just sit there for 2 hours. And the first thing he's like, "Man, you look tired." That's fucking wild. The movie has what is a almost 5-minute long slow motion sequence at the end, which is just insane. And so some of the interviewers are talking about how incredibly hard it was to create that sequence because the schedule was so tight and that large sections of it had to be repeatedly redone because that slow motion thing is incredibly fucking hard to do in animation.
Well, let's explain how you do slow motion in live action is usually you would shoot more frames than usual and then slow it down. So instead of shooting 24 frames a second, maybe you shoot 48 or some multiplier above that, then play it back at 24, and now it is in slow motion. It's a process the camera kind of does for you. You can't do that in animation. You have to draw it to look like it was shot faster and then slowed down. They fucking nail it. It's unbelievable. But, even if they had all the time in the world, I think they would have had to redo it multiple times. Because there's no guide on how to do that. It's just, and this movie, how it animates, physicality is basically second to none. And so there's a lot of just attention to detail that blew my mind, and that it being done on this short time frame is insane. But I think there's no version of this movie, no matter how many resources they had, that would have been an easy production, because of as you said, the ambition of it is just off the charts.
Yes, because it's just such an audacious sequence, and we'll get into it when we talk about the movie. But yes, it did not surprise me that he just had a long answer. And I had a hard time translating the answer, honestly, because it had a little bit too much technical vocabulary for me. But it just was incredibly clear that he was like, that thing was fucking hard to make. And I'm like, yeah, that's the number one thing I've remembered about this movie is the opening, the soundtrack, and this fucking slow-mo sequence at the end. It's just insane. I've never seen anything like it. The story that he says, though, in this thing that has very little to do with the production, but makes me laugh very hard. And if this is accurate, I just think it tells you a lot about who this dude is as the director. So he has a story about the production after party. They made the movie, they wrapped on the movie, it's ready to go, and they have a big party with everybody involved. And apparently Mashimo, the director, decided he wanted to create a bingo raffle game that they would play. But the thing you would win from this bingo raffle are tickets that basically say that you do anything for you a day ticket. It's kind of like what it would translate to. The kind of thing you'd give to your boyfriend or girlfriend as a birthday present. If you need me to do the chores, you need me to give you a shoulder massage, right? It's that kind of idea. But he made these tickets with specific names of people on them, but did not apparently tell anybody or ask for their permission to make these tickets, which is so fucking great. And then the best part, though, is according to Katsuyoshi, apparently he says he won the ticket for the singer Matsubara Miki, who was a big city pop singer at this time. She would have been in her mid-20s. Her first single was this kind of sleeper hit that blew up big. We'll talk about her a little bit. But a very in-demand musical artist and very attractive young woman. Apparently he won the ticket for her, but then Mashimo came over, took the ticket out of his hands and said, no, this is the one you get, and instead gave him the one for Takechiho Haruka, the old guy who is the author of the light novels, who would have been his 40s at this point. Again, I did that, I don't know if this is an apocryphal story, some of the stuff this dude talks about in the interview makes me kind of go, I'm not sure if that happened that way. Even if he's exaggerating this, that is a fucking hilarious story, though. And I like to think that it actually happened.
It's unbelievable. That feels like the kind of incident you would get in a gag manga about the production of the movie that, exaggerated events, like the men who created Gundam manga, or something like that. And I love it. It's hilarious. Yeah, this Mashimo guy sounds like quite a character.
Yeah, he's an oddball for sure. So the movie itself released simply as a Dirty Pair on March 14th, 1987, as a double feature with Batsu and Terry. I didn't bother to really look up what Batsu and Terry is, but it double feature with Batsu and Terry. Coinciding with the movie, there was a game released on March 28th for the Famicom Disk System in Japan. For people don't know, that is a like add-on system for the Famicom. Over here, the NES. This never came out of here, but it's like a fancier NES game. I did play a little bit of it. It is exactly what you would expect. It's a side-scrolling shooter that is inscrutable if you do not read the like instructional booklet that would come with the game. But if people are curious, it's pretty easy to run on emulators. The only thing you have to remember is it's one of those weird old NES or Famicom games where you have to hit the select button to select certain items in the menu. So it took me a long time where I thought that it wasn't registering my inputs because I had to hit the select button, which I had not assigned to anything on my emulator. But it's, it's an interesting curiosity. It was kind of fun to play, but, it's that kind of old side-scrolling 80s type NES game. The movie was released on VHS in America, as I said earlier, in 1994 by Streamline Pictures, and that version is when it was both dubbed in English and given the subtitle that we still refer to it in English to this day, which is Dirty Pair Project Eden. Which, of course, a phrase that pops up in the movie and makes a lot of sense. Actually, no. It doesn't necessarily make sense because there was no other Dirty Pair shit in English. When you've got a bunch of different things, Dirty Pair animations, it makes sense that you'd want an actual proper title for the movie that's not just called Dirty Pair. It is kind of funny that it wasn't necessarily that needed when this movie originally came out in English, but that's where we get the subtitle from.
But this is exactly the same as with the Lupin the Third movie, The Mystery of Mamo. That is just called Lupin the Third in its Japanese release. And Mystery of Mamo is basically a fan title given to it later on. In Japan, it's known as Lupin versus the Clone, but again, its original release title was just Lupin Sansei. Just as the first Dragon Ball Z movie is just Dragon Ball Z, and we call it Dead Zone. They say it sometimes in Japan as Give Me Back My Gohan, but it was just called Dragon Ball Z. So by Dragon Ball Z, you either mean the 291 episode show or the 41-minute movie with Garlic Jr.
Exactly. It's just, time is a flat circle. Everything comes back around because this is just what the video game industry does these days. What the anime industry did in the 80s, just what video games do today. We're like, fuck it, it's God of War. Fuck it, it's Doom. It's like, whatever. Let's just call it what it is. That's what they did with these movies back then. So that's my history. Let's get into the staff. They're not stuff on this one. They are staff. Obviously, again, we're talking about Sunrise. The director, Mashimo Kochi, some of his stuff. So he was a Tatsunoko guy, much more so than a Sunrise guy. He started at Tatsunoko Productions in the 70s and began directing shows with 1981's Gold Lighton, which is like a super robot show. He would go on to do his most famous work, though, in the 2000s, which is when he became the main director for the Dot Hack series of OVAs and TV shows. Obviously, that's your big multimedia project with all the PS2 games and stuff. But he was like the head. If you look at his filmography, it's just got like a dozen Dot Hack projects. So that's like the big thing you probably would know him from. And Project Eden was his first feature film, which is crazy because it's a hell of a feature film. The script for this one is written by Hoshiyama Hiroyuki. Hoshiyama wrote the script for episode 2 of the original show. So that's his kind of Dirty Pair connection. That's the do girls like men with chest hair. But he is really just one of the most prolific writers at Sunrise. We talked about this in the last episode, but just to reiterate, he is the guy who wrote like 11 episodes each for Turn A Gundam and Mobile Suit Gundam, including some of the most important episodes for each show. So he's like one of the key writers on a lot of those kinds of projects at Sunrise. He was also the series composition role for the OVA for Dirty Pair. So he would continue on kind of in this role writing for the OVA series. Character design, once again, we're Dokite Tsukasa. It's the same guy all the way down. Obviously, like if you're thinking of animation with Dirty Pair, you're really thinking about him. Obviously, you are now, though, using the character designs that much more closely align with the original ones with Hosono Fujihiko, the mangaka that made the uniforms. So the uniform designs that the movie uses, that the next OVA series continues with, that has like the kind of open chest and the like... the straps on the bottoms, I don't know what you call them, but like, they've got a bunch of like random belts. I don't know what they are. But all that stuff like that is from that original uniform design. So the designs are much like kind of closer aligned with what that was before the director of the original show wanted it to look a little bit more like actual female professional wrestlers, which is what their ultimate costume in the original show was. The unit director, Yatabe Kotsuyoshi, which again, that's the guy who was in all those interviews I just read. So all the background stuff came from him, but he also then goes on to be the main director for the OVAs, so we'll talk about him in a little bit. The mechanical design for this, which I think is a particularly notable role on this production, because there's a lot of shit going on here, is Miyatake Kazutaka. He is one of the designers working at Studio Nue, which is obviously where all the Dirty Pair stuff came from. Refer back to last episode for what Studio Nue is. He did lots of mechanical design on the Macross series, alongside Kawamori Shoji, the other Studio Nue guy who's the main creator for Macross. So, a very, very prestigious creator in that field. This is a movie that's got a lot of fiddly mechanical stuff in it. Art director for the movie is Miyame Mitsuharu, and then the music is Shiguma Kenzo. With opening animation by Morimoto Koji and storyboards for the opening animation by Mashimo and Morimoto. Just a note on Morimoto, he is a really legendary animator who has worked on just countless stuff. He worked on Macross Do You Remember Love? He worked on Akira. He worked on Kiki's Delivery Service and a lot else. He eventually went on to found the animation studio Studio 4 Degree C. There he directed Magnetic Rose, which is an incredible kind of short film. Like, I don't know how you describe this. It's part of an anthology movie called Memories, which is produced by it's Memories, which has stuff by Otomo, who is the creator of Akira. Memories is amazing. We will definitely cover it at some point on a Japanimation station. It's an incredible anthology movie. Magnetic Rose is also amazing. He also produced Yuasa Masaki's directorial debut Mind Game, and since then he has mostly worked on music videos and short films, which makes sense when you look at the opening animation for Dirty Pair. But yes, so that's kind of a bunch of the names that popped up when researching this movie.
And I mean, you can't stop there, because when you say the music is by Shiguma Kenzo, some of the music, like this has a proper 80s soundtrack in the vein of a lot of 80s movies we know in America, where it's a lot of like artists doing big songs. Particularly one in particular, it's Matsubara Miki, who does the opening, the ending, an insert song. You have other artists on here. It is a soundtrack-driven movie in a way that, I mean, anime actually pretty rarely does it this way, where like you have an actual like compilation soundtrack driving the movie. But Matsubara Miki is someone we've talked about before, Sean, because she's got a amazing Gundam connection.
Yeah, so Matsubara Miki does Safari Hot Eyes, which is the opening theme, which is also redone with English lyrics, is the song Over the Top, which plays during the slow motion sequence at the end. And if you're like, oh, a song that in the opening theme is in Japanese, and then they do an English lyric version as an insert song partway through, that sounds like something I've seen in the Gundam. It is something you've seen in the Gundam, because she also did the same thing for 0083 Stardust Memory, where she was the singer for the opening theme, The Winner, which was reused as the insert song Back to Paradise, which is just The Winner, but with English lyrics. And funnily enough, in both instances, I actually kind of prefer the English lyric version. I kind of like Over the Top a bit more than Safari Eyes. In the same way, I kind of like Back to Paradise a little bit more than The Winner. But Matsubara Miki is just like an amazing singer and musical artist. So she was one of like the queens of city pop, which is your genre of 80s music in Japan, very inspired by like Michael Jackson, who we'll talk about later. But, it's very much in that style, but has a little bit more... I think it has a little bit more of like a kind of cafe music vibe in the terms of like you have that very present live band quality is behind it as well. It's just a really great genre of music that people might be familiar with because it had a big revival during the pandemic, where it's kind of rediscovered worldwide because a bunch of the songs, including Plastic Love, and then also Matsubara Miki's first big single, which is Mayonaka no Door, Stay With Me, those songs became really big again and kind of became pseudo like memes, or more just like they got shared a lot on social media. And the more it got shared, the kind of more viral it became. And so city pop, a great genre. Matsubara Miki, one of like the defining singers of that genre. And of course, city pop is basically what the genre of music that Dirty Pair is using anyways. Like that's very much the vibe that the instrumental music in the original show goes for, along with the opening and ending themes of the original show. And it's very much true of all the music in this, both in terms of the these songs that they play, the full songs that are then reused in kind of as elements for the instrumental music throughout the movie. But then also all the stuff that isn't necessarily directly connected to these songs is still generally in that city pop vein, outside of one notable place where it goes very symphonic orchestra near the end for a very different effect, which is cool. But it is like, if you want that 80s Japanese sound, like getting Matsubara Miki to do your songs, and like the composers and producers that work with her to do your songs is like the number one way to do it. And so the soundtrack for this movie is fucking primo shit. It is so goddamn good. Safari Eyes, over the top, incredible. She does the ending theme Pas de deux, which is a dance for two in French, which is also just an absolute fucking banger. I love the ending theme for this movie. And then you do have one other artist that does the song Matters to Me, which is the song that Yuri is listening to when they're flying over to the factory, and she's like dancing to it, and Kay is freaking out because they're flying all over the place and going crazy. That is by a band called Poker Face. And it might shock you to learn, Jonathan, that if you're trying to Google something called Poker Face relating to music, it's really fucking hard to not just find Lady Gaga. So yes. I can't tell you anything else about Poker Face. I don't think they were ever a major musical act, because there's just was not a lot about them. I kept on coming up in Japanese with there was like a theatrical troupe or something called Poker Face. There's just a lot of stuff, but still, regardless of that band or how famous they were, I think Matters to Me is also a great song that is also really, really like great pillar of the soundtrack, because the elements of that song are so great when they're remixed or reused in different ways throughout the rest of the soundtrack. But yes, this is a movie that is driven by two things above all else, which is animation and music, and kind of the other elements take a back seat. And there are some times where that will frustrate me, and we'll get into all of that. But the music and the animation are like as good as you can ask for, especially if you are into the 80s aesthetic that they're like, not that they're just that they are defining actively every second of this movie. They're like, no, this is what the 80s are like aesthetically, because obviously it's smack dab in the middle of the 80s. They're like, no, this is the shit we're all trying to be like. Look how good this is. And it turns out it's really good.
Yeah. So this is a fascinating movie.
Yeah.
Because if you just say to someone, let's say someone has seen, I was in with this position last week, has seen the 26 episodes of the TV show, loved them, considers themselves a fan of Dirty Pair, and then you say, hey, there's a Dirty Pair movie, go see that. You would think, this must be akin to like one of the Star Trek movies. This must be like an episode of Dirty Pair, but feature length, bigger, more bombastic, all of that stuff. And it is not. This is not at all like episodes of Dirty Pair. It's got Kei and Yuri. It's clearly set in the same, general world. But it is doing something so different. And even just saying, like, it is an anime movie from the 80s doesn't, I think, describe it correctly. Because there's very little I've ever seen that is quite like this. This movie is effectively an 80-minute long music video. And when that kind of term, calling something a feature-length music video, is trotted out, it's usually trotted out for 80s American movies that kind of had that MTV aesthetic, your Jerry Bruckheimer movies, your Tony Scott movies like Top Gun or Flashdance or something like that. But those movies aren't literally feature-length music videos. They have quite a bit of plot. They have quite a bit of, at least in the case of something like Top Gun, character and action and stuff that is unrelated to the music, and they'll stop and have music-driven scenes. But this is much more close to like actually being what would a music video look like at feature length, where the story is very much, there is a story. It is wrong to say there isn't a story here, but it is more oblique, it is more sort of backgrounded, and it is told primarily through kinetic motion and the marriage of music and imagery. It does a thing that movies with music very, very rarely do, where it drops all other sound when the music is playing. That is a music video thing, but you don't, like in Top Gun, you don't see that when like Highway to the Danger Zone is playing. They're still doing the sound effects for the planes and stuff like that, right? It is pretty rare you get the full-on, no sound effects, just music and image like a music video will do. Dirty Pair, the movie, does that all over the place. And so it is this totalizing mise-en-scène where, like, the environments you're looking at, the big monsters and the mechanical designs and all of and the various costume changes that Kei and Yuri go through in this movie, or costume reductions, it might be better to say, because they're just getting increasingly naked over the course of the movie, alongside Carson D. Carson. This is an equal opportunity nakedness in this movie. And so you have that going on, and it is, again, totalizing. It is a complete aesthetic in the visuals that, like, all narrative weight, all weight is being placed there. And then you have this totalizing mise-en-bande, which is the term for, everything on the soundtrack, where, again, when it gets into its groove, everything else, voice acting, sound effects, all that is gone, and it is just the music. And there's very few things I would say, like, fully remind me of this. The three I came up with that I kept thinking of while watching were the Miyazaki Hayao short film On Your Mark from 1995, which is an incredible little thing. It's the most different thing Miyazaki's ever made in his own career, because it's a music video for a song by Chage and Asuka, and it's really interesting, but it does this kind of, again, the music is the only sound, and it does this kind of oblique story with this incredible kind of sci-fi environment. It also made me think of, have you ever seen, Sean, the Interstellar 5555 movie, which is the anime based on the Daft Punk album Discovery? That is a 2003 anime. Yeah, it got a re-release recently. Although you don't want the re-release because it's a bad 4K hatchet job. But yeah, that is an anime that was done. I forget what studio did that, but it is like, and it's not like an American thing in an anime style. It's an actual anime, but it is set to Daft Punk's Discovery, and there's definitely some overlap there. But honestly, the thing this reminded me most of, like overwhelmingly reminded me of, is the 1984 Giorgio Moroder cut of Fritz Lang's Metropolis, which is the cut that, again, Metropolis is the 1927 classic sci-fi movie, influential to films all over the world. Yes. But what that one was Giorgio Moroder, the famous 80s composer who is absolutely central to 80s music. Like, the 80s sound is partially defined by his work all over the world, particularly American movies. Like, he's the guy who, like, at the beginning of that decade, he did American Gigolo. He worked on movies throughout that decade, like, really important. And he wanted to, like, bring Metropolis to a new generation. So his 84 cut of Metropolis completely recut the movie, restored it, got it down to about 80 minutes, and then it is scored to contemporary pop acts who wrote original songs for it. And it's stuff like Freddie Mercury, Bonnie Tyler, Pat Benatar, Adam Ant, all of that stuff, with original Giorgio Moroder stuff in between. And that movie is structured, or that version of Metropolis, which I've watched several times. I showed it to my Giant Robots class because I think that is an amazing 80s artifact. Like, the Dirty Pair movie is structured like that, where you have these narrative sequences that will have some more traditional film scoring and dialogue, and then it will move into a big musical set piece. Then it'll kind of go back for a little while, then big musical set piece, and each musical set piece will have not just its own flavor of music, but a slightly different stylistic flavor, because the way Moroder recut Metropolis very much built it into these musically driven sequences. And I had to look up, like, when was that released in Japan? And the Moroder cut of Metropolis was released the same year that Dirty Pair started in Japan, in January of 1985. And I just have to wonder if there was, maybe it's just what was in the atmosphere with 80s music, but there are, like, such synergies that are going on there. It's fascinating. And I think if you are, if you want to criticize Project Eden as a Dirty Pair thing, there's a lot you could do here. That, like, the fact that it has Kei and Yuri in a pretty much purely reactive stance for the entire movie, like, they are never proactively executing a plan or anything. They are just reacting to what happens in the film. And normally that would bother me. Or the fact that, like, Kei and Yuri don't get a ton of material together. The main plot more is about Kei and Carson D. Carson. There's not as much of a Kei-Yuri dynamic going on in this movie. All of that, like, should bother me, and it ultimately doesn't, because I think what it is doing in that musical space, which again I think it's really rare to see a commercial fiction film commit itself to this level of musical storytelling. And I already saw a couple of people, when I was tweeting about this, say, yeah, this movie is like an AMV as a movie. But even that isn't quite right, because an AMV is taking existing music and existing animation and recombining it, and this is a from the ground up, effectively musical, but through sheer imagery. And that is just such a rare thing to actually see executed, let alone at this high level, where this is, I think, the best looking sunrise thing I've ever seen. I think it is just an unbelievable aesthetic marvel. And to have that all together in one place, like, I think it is like a borderline, like, avant-garde work of art that is also 80s as shit and kick-ass. And I'm just kind of in awe of it. I wish I was watching it right now. It's like, it's been on my mind since I watched it. I cannot shake what a weird, amazing thing this is.
Yeah. And obviously, like, in the kind of aesthetics department, like, I agree wholeheartedly. Like, the one other thing that it reminded me of, it just in terms of vibes, and obviously this is another 80s thing, is it does remind me a lot of the 1980s Transformers animated movie, which also has, obviously, like, lots of lyrical songs. Now there, it's not as well integrated because some of that is like, hey, let's play Dare to Be Stupid by Weird Al, which was a weird choice, but a fucking brilliant choice. But they're obviously not like integrating Dare to Be Stupid in the same way into the instrumental soundtrack. But it's got that, part of it is like the heavy, like mechanical fucking shit and all like the little like finicky details on the mechanical animation that you have in like Unicron and stuff. Very much reminds me of a lot of the stuff you see in Professor Wattsman's lab, but also just that the way that the music comes in and just the synergy between the visuals and the music with that really strong 80s vibe to it is so potent and so powerful.
Well, remember, Transformers comes out of Macross the same way that we've got Miyatake Kazutaka doing the mechanical design here, and he's a Macross guy. There's the Studio Nue roots to Dirty Pair, so there's a lot of shared DNA between Transformers and Dirty Pair, weird as that sounds. And I do think that probably is in the world of anime, and Transformers, the movie, effectively is an anime. It was completely animated in Japan. That probably is the closest comparison, I would say. But this, I do think this, like, reaches a different level of, like, aesthetic excellence.
Yes. I will say, though, that I do think the, like, what it is doing with the narrative bothers me more than it does you. And not just in, like, the Dirty Pair way. Like, I do think there's one thing that fundamentally frustrates me about the movie. I mean, I guess this partially is a Dirty Pair way, but it is also just kind of reaches into the kind of what the movie's doing with its storyline, is I do think this is one of the very rare Dirty Pair things that steps on the wrong side of a very tight line that Dirty Pair walks, and the movie does feel sexist to me in the way that it's using Yudi and Kay, particularly Kay and Carson D. Carson. Like, there is, like, this movie loves Carson D. Carson so much, it wants to make him so cool that it ends up putting Kay into such a submissive position. And the Dirty Pair end up feeling so ineffectual relative to Carson D. Carson. And there are moments in the movie that do, like, profoundly frustrate me, because I do think there's a lot of interesting narrative stuff it's doing that is marrying what it's doing with the plot and the aesthetic, which we could talk about, the, like, Professor Wattsman and, like, the mechanical bioengineering, and there's some cool commentary there. But there is a really, like, frustrating aspect in how it is thinking of its characters, and part of it is coming from this, like, you know, the movie doesn't articulate this position very, like, thoroughly, but there is a little bit of a biological essentialism, like, man and woman thing going on here that is kind of stepping off the line to me of getting into this position where you are putting the Dirty Pair into this very traditional feminine role in this kind of story that is making them far more submissive to this, like, male character who is dominating the narrative. That does frustrate me quite a bit at points in the film.
I can understand that, and I don't know if I have a fully coherent opinion on that, because I've only seen this movie once. I've only had about a week to think about it. And I'll be honest, that first viewing, I caught maybe half the plot. Like, it's so fast. And honestly, this is true of a lot of Dirty Pair stuff. Like, I think Dirty Pair very much falls into, if you've ever seen, Patrick Willems has his video essay about what he calls vibes movies, and he defines that as stuff like the Michael Mann Miami Vice, or the Christopher Nolan movie Tenet, or the Mission Impossible movies with Tom Cruise, where, like, you don't really remember the plot much afterwards, but you remember images and moods and atmospheres and their globe-trotting and all of this stuff. And I think that's what Dirty Pair is. Like, there's a lot of Dirty Pair episodes where I love the episode, but if you asked me what exactly were Kay and Yuri trying to accomplish, I couldn't tell. There's no way I could tell you, like, what exactly, like, they were sent out to do, because that's just not the thing that is most important, but also, like, it moves in such a way that, you know, again, like, kineticism and character dynamics and all of that wind up mattering a lot more. And I think the movie winds up being the most overt version of that, because, like, there's so much happening early on. This is the rare anime movie where I had trouble keeping up with the subtitles because the visuals are so active, I would just not be looking at the bottom of the screen. And then I also wouldn't be paying that much attention to the dialogue. So what Japanese I do know would be getting mixed up. And like I would have to be rewinding. And it's like there's just so much going on and it kind of washes over you. So I can totally see where you're coming from on that, Sean. And I'm not saying you're right or wrong. I just like, after one viewing, I don't know if I definitely did think the Carson of it all. I do like the character. I do enjoy all the stuff with Carson D. Carson. His last standoff is fucking cool. It's cool as shit.
Yeah.
But like I do think, as I said, if I were critiquing this more on the Dirty Pair level, I think the big problem is it feels like Kei and Yuri's friendship is just taken for granted, whereas the best Dirty Pair stories in some way make that connection between them the most important thing by the end, even if you have a prominent male guest star. And I think this one doesn't square that circle at the end, and that is probably where the brunt of my critique would go if I'm looking at it on that level.
Yeah, like if I'm looking at it purely on like the Dirty Pair level, like I do think this movie does notably violate what to me are like the two like tenets or rules of Dirty Pair, if they have it, which is one, the Dirty Pair always get the last laugh, and two, the most important relationship is what they have with each other. Like that is like, I think like two things that really define, at least in the TV show, like the Dirty Pair stories, is it's always like, you know, they might have temporary setbacks, but the Dirty Pair always come out on top. And like they're always kind of formidable. There's almost this like Superman or Kiryu Kazuma-esque quality in Yakuza games to them of like, at the end of the day, you get them in the room with the problem and they have a gun, they will fucking shoot that problem in the face, and maybe they'll blow up the whole planet, but they will have solved that problem because they are unstoppable. And then also it's like whatever hunk of the week comes across, at the end of the day, it's about the relationship they have with each other. And so for those are two things that I love about the stories, because it's part of what we talked about last time, is it sort of flips on the head with the gender dynamics, this kind of show that almost universally has male protagonists and male lead characters like a Lupin and Lupin III. It's so rare that you have this specific kind of series that have female main characters. And those two, I think, kind of guiding principles are what help the series walk the right side of that line with having them be women and have them being women being important to the story, but also not falling into sexist narrative traps that other series will fall into. That is very easy for them to do when they have male main characters, and I think would be a danger for Dirty Pair. And the TV show, I think, never ends up on the wrong side of that line. And I think most of the other OVA stuff is not always as clear-eyed about it as the original TV show, but is generally on the right side of the line. I think in both aspects, the movie does not follow those two principles. Like, the most important relationship in the movie is very explicitly Kay and Carson D. Carson, and also Carson is the character that gets the last laugh, right? He's especially because he doesn't die in the end, he's the dude that is privileged above all else. He is the character that ends up on top. And so the Dirty Pair fan, like, that would be the criticism I have about it. The more substantive thing that is not really Dirty Pair in the narrative that I think really bothers me with Carson and Kay's relationship is that it is coded, I think, in a fairly sexist way. Like, the most clear place that I can point to in the movie for this, and I did, because the movie is so aesthetically driven, I did come out of screenshot retirement, and I did a shit ton of screenshots for this movie and have my screenshot gallery, because it's just that good. I was like, there's no way I could not do my Kyoto vacation bullshit and just take like 200 fucking screenshots of this thing. But there's a part in the movie about midway through, this is the scene where Yuri and Kay and Carson are like dangling, and Yuri's fucking butt is getting shown or whatever, and then they all collapse at the bottom. At that point, he has stolen Kay's gun surreptitiously, right? And then they're like having a little bit of like back and forth. She gets up and tries to fight him, and she's like trying to punch him and all this stuff, and she can't even touch him. Like, he's dodging every single move. There's nothing to it. And then he socks her in the face. She collapses down to the ground with a big bruise on her face. And then he turns and looks at her, throws the gun back to her, and says, the line that they try to make every Carson D. Carson line the coolest cool dude line ever, where he's like, even I have something that I'm willing to stake my life on, or whatever. And he looks at her and says it very seriously. And she looks up at him with this wide-eyed expression of like, oh, what a man, while she's also cradling the bruise on her face, which is like, fuck that. But not just fuck that, because then later you have the moment where they are both grabbed by Professor Wiseman's giant, crazy, fucked off hands, and they're in the cage. And that scene is where then Carson, I forget exactly what he says, but he says something to Kay that's kind of rude, and she slaps him across the face. And what that communicates to me is that in a fight with fists, Kay can't do anything. Kay can't touch this guy because he's so amazing. But in the womanly role of slapping him for being rude, for making a sexual comment, in that case, then she can hit him. And so that's where I think the movie does code itself in the action and in a lot of its aesthetics, where it does sort of like privilege this very sort of like standard regressive gender dynamic between these characters, which I think also comes with like the overall narrative that it's presenting about the like union between a man and woman and all that kind of stuff that is part of the Project Eden, the Adam and Eve of it all. When you have that as part of your overall kind of unifying plot idea, and you're also dealing with the gender dynamics between your main characters in this way, especially in a series that has so far avoided those things, it does sort of sour elements of the movie to me in a way that frustrates me, because I do think this movie could be like the ultimate 10 out of 10 greatest fucking, like one of like the all-time great animated movies ever made, like near the top of the heap, if it could have done both of these things at the same time, both be this sort of visceral, incredible, powerful aesthetic journey with all the 80s vibes and all of that, but also have used that to deliver a story that spoke to the heart of Dirty Pair, where I think the heart of Dirty Pair as a series, animated at least, is so pure and powerful and potent. To have like both of those things build on each other would be the thing that I would have wanted this movie ultimately to do. It is a thing that has frustrated me in the two times I've now watched it, right? The original time I watched it and watched it for this. It frustrated me originally, and it frustrated me again, where it's like, I feel like the movie's so close to fully going over the line to something that kind of marries both aspects of what it's doing perfectly, and instead it ends up falling into this place that is so exceptional in one aspect of what it's doing, but really falls flat in this other aspect.
So I don't disagree with any of that. I think that's a very fluid, trenchant analysis of what it's doing. And I agree, like, that moment where she can't fight Carson just didn't pass the smell test for me on, like, having watched 26 episodes of Dirty Pair. Like, unless it's the Terminator, basically. And there's at least 3 Terminators in the Dirty Pair series. There's one here, there's one in Nolandia, there's one in Dirty Pair 2. So there's a lot of Terminators. Unless it's that, like a machine, Kay and Yuri can always beat them. Like, that's just, they always, you know, they can do anything. And that felt wrong. And then, you know, I also think my biggest criticism of the movie on a plot level would be that Carson lives at the end. Makes no fucking sense. His death moment is so good. You want that to be his death. But also, like, I think if he died, it would go a long way towards, even if you have those sort of sexist undertones elsewhere, at least ending the movie on the right foot. Because when he gets, like, stabbed and then he goes off to do his thing, Kay and Yuri just go unleashed. They go the Super Saiyan version of Kay and Yuri, and they clean up they are the Superman versions of themselves, and they clean this situation up in 5 minutes, scored to over the top with amazing slow-mo animation and all that, right? And it is just, they save the day very quickly once that happens. And so I think that would feel more right if they wouldn't be having the last laugh because they'd be bummed out. And there are plenty of other Dirty Pair episodes that end with them both on top and a little bummed out about something that happened. That's fine, right? My favorite episode of the original series is one of those, where episode 8, I think it is, it's where Yuri's childhood love is dead, but Kay has, like, decided to keep that secret, and then they go off to fight another day, and they are both on top, but also there's a certain melancholy to it, right? So you could do something like that. I will say, watching it at least the first time, a lot of those issues didn't code that deeply for me, because I did pretty quickly settle into watching this the way you would be watching a music video, which is where, like, there's a level of, like, narrative literalism that, like, just dissipates, and that's not what I'm thinking about much. Like, even to make the Metropolis comparison again, I genuinely enjoy the Giorgio Moroder version of Metropolis, and I arguably enjoy it more than the actual, like, full-length, complete Fritz Lang version, because I think there's, as cool as Metropolis looks, I think the main message of that movie is pretty fucking rancid, the way it is doing, like, this, the hand and the heart and all of this, and, like, and it does this stupid, like, it's both, I think people remember it as a trenchant capitalist critique because of its, overworld, underworld thing, and they don't remember that the end is that, but we have to have the workers and the bosses unite. And it's like, no, that movie should be ending with them killing the bosses and, like, taking over Metropolis, and it doesn't. But I don't care about that as much in the Moroder version, which so prioritizes those aesthetics above everything else that you're watching it in a different register than I think you're watching the normal version. So this is not me excusing anything you just said, Sean, but just explaining, like, the different valence I wound up watching it through and why maybe that didn't hit me as hard, even though I don't think you're wrong at all.
Yeah, no, and absolutely, because I do think it's, like, the movie is kind of to be in that way, because it is, like, because it like, for me, I'll go from being like, man, like, fucking Carson, like, this character, there's just, again, there is no movie I've ever seen that so desperately wants to suck one of its characters' dicks as this movie wants to suck Carson's dick. Like, it loves this character so much. Every line is, like, created in a lab to make him the coolest dude possible, and not in the way that, like, in the Dirty Pair show, if this dude walked up, Yuri and Kay would be making fun of him because of how ridiculous it is, of how, like, how stupidly perfect he is. But so I'll go from, like, kind of criticizing that, and then it will just have this, like, absolutely fucking masterpiece piece of animation and musical sequence that will just blow my mind. And there's so much of that. I mean, we just got to talk about the fucking opening animation, which is, like, maybe the best 90 seconds of any animated movie ever, when Safari Eyes is playing and you get this, like, to call it a, like, James Bond style opening would be too complimentary to James Bond openings, because they're not as good as this.
No,
because it's just, my God, it's not the first opening 90 seconds, because there is that cold open, which is also very good, which has you're like setting up kind of the background, and you see Carson for the first time. They blow up an entire, like, fucking Mobius ring or whatever. But then you transition into this kind of, like, literal music video sequence with all this great abstract imagery about, like, the female body and technology and, like, that kind of bio-organic technological fusion. That is, again, that is what the story is about, right? The story is about this guy, Professor Wattsman, trying to define what, like, life is using his technology to create an artificial life form, in which he cannot do. And I will talk about Wattsman because he's the best fucking character of the movie, and there's so much great stuff with him. But that's, like, so much of what the movie is about on a plot level, and I feel like so much of that is communicated through this incredibly evocative imagery that taking screenshots of it is not really enough. Like, you need to just watch it animated. But I did take the screenshots in my screenshot album just to have them, because it's, if you want a good wallpaper, just take a screenshot of any random frame of this opening. It's so fucking good. But just the use of color, the abstract imagery, the use of that blending of organic and technological aesthetics, it is so potent, and then all timed into this brilliant song, Safari Eyes. I mean, you could just watch this movie or that sequence on repeat for the rest of your life and you die happy.
Oh, it's amazing. Like, the James Bond comparison is inevitable, because I do think it is, like, the central referent for what it's doing. Like, I do think it is a better opening than literally any James Bond opening. There are other James Bond songs I like as much, but in the specific marriage of music and imagery, like, this blows them all out of the water. It's particularly interesting, I think, when you look at this in comparison to what the James Bond themes and openings were in the 80s, which I would say is the roughest period for both. There's a couple good songs in there, but the, like, actual opening animations for James Bond in the 80s are very lackluster and limp. They would do better stuff before and after. But it definitely feels like what Project Eden is doing is the, like, platonic, ideal, like, thing in your head that you never think you'll actually access of a, like, a Goldfinger or You Only Live Twice, or some of those older openings that are these, like, amazing, like visual audio marriages, but it's doing this with, because it's not having to contend with like live action plus animation and photography and all this stuff. It's just animated, so it can create whatever images it wants. And what it creates is such an interesting, as you say, it is about the themes of the movie. It's about some of the Dirty Pair ideas, but it also is just this completely aesthetically singular thing that both stands outside of the movie and is an interesting commentary and preview of what you're going to see. Again, I think it is like the platonic ideal of what the James Bond openings go for, achieved at a ridiculously high level.
Yeah, because, I mean, it is aesthetically what it's doing with both the visuals and the music is it is just presenting you like this is what the movie is, right? It's like I've been teaching fucking Romeo and Juliet, so I've got Romeo and Juliet on the brain, but it's like the aesthetic equivalent of the prologue to Romeo and Juliet that tells you what the story is going to be about and your star-crossed lovers and that they're going to die and all this stuff. And this like has that quality of where it's presenting to you broadly, like thematically, this is what is on this movie's brain. But then also musically, Safari Eyes is the kind of it's the most driving song in the soundtrack that is reused in different components throughout the instrumentals of the movie all the way through. And then the movie is effectively bookended by it because the climactic action sequence, that's the big set piece slow-mo sequence at the end, is set to Over the Top, which is just the English language version and a kind of remix of Safari Eyes. And so it is just this kind of like perfect opening statement of the movie that is the like in the abstract sense, in like the dream world that you're watching this movie in. That's what this movie, the platonic like essence of the film. Here's 90 seconds of that. Now let us like, here is, the traffic of our 2-hour stage or our 70-minute stage in this case is going to elaborate on what this like very condensed thing is introducing to you.
Yes. No, I completely agree. It's a real stunner of a sequence. And, I mean, Dirty Pair, all their openings are great. The opening to the original TV show, the opening to the second OVA. This one kind of takes the cake. I mean, because look at what it's doing. But also it's interesting because it's not an anime TV show opening. This wouldn't really work as your theme song to a weekly TV show. That's a different kind of thing. This is very much a movie opening, and I think it's cool because there's plenty of anime movies that basically do a, anime TV theme song opening and do it very well. But I think seeing it, the way it's done here is just, it's a very different kind of thing than you see from anime, and again, executed at the highest of levels.
Yeah. You gotta really give props to that animator Morimoto Koji, because as far as I know, he animated that entire sequence solo. Obviously, and then he collaborated on the storyboards with the director Mashimo. But it's like, what a fucking just absolute singular piece of work that is.
Yes.
It's just it's fucking crazy. And I just remember very vividly when we were doing for the weekly stuff, our last thing, we're ranking the top 10 anime openings and endings, and I had to send you a text at a certain point where I'm like, are we counting movies? Because if we're counting movies, I can't do anything other than put this as number one. And you're like, no, we're just doing TV shows. I'm like, okay, good. Because it just isn't, it's not fair. Because as you say, this is not a TV show opening. This would be so overkill for a TV show opening. Like, I would feel bad for any TV show. Like, how would you make an episode that follows this opening? Which wouldn't make sense, but as this defining opening statement for a movie, it is absolutely perfect.
Yes, absolutely. And it just goes from there in incredible ways. I think one thing to talk about is Kei and Yuri's attire here, because the basic design of their costumes is what they'll have for the Dirty Pair 2 OVA. But they're actually not in them that long in this movie, because quickly once they arrive on the planet, everything goes to shit, and they're in all sorts of different forms of nakedness basically for the rest of the movie. And again, the animation of bodies in this film is really incredible. But what do you think of, I guess we can just talk about it here because it is the costume they'll have for the rest of the stuff we're talking about. This costume, which has the closed neckline. Sorry, what? Collar,
collar, yeah.
Yeah, the close collar, but then the cleavage chest area is open, and then it shows quite a bit more skin around their body than the original TV show version. I think I like the TV show version more. I think the one here and then the OVA can lean more towards what feels like kind of raw exhibitionism in a way that sometimes feels uncomfortable. I think in the movie, I do think one thing I like about the movie is it is so playful at a certain point about how it's using the nudity almost to like an Austin Powers degree, not to that level, but like there's some very fun stuff I think they're able to do. I did think in the TV show quite often, I was like, man, I think the scene would be better in their original clothes, because I think it's just it's a design that it feels more practical. This costume looks very uncomfortable, I have to say, to wear, and in a way that the original costumes do not. But yeah, I'm curious what you think.
Yeah, no, I think it works fine for this movie, just because, like, it matches the movie's energy. Again, they're not even in them that much, and then they have, like, the cool mech kind of versions of them at the end. They're, like,
those rock.
Versions,
those look amazing.
Fucking sick. So when you get to the OVA version, and it's just, like, you're watching regular Dirty Pair episodes, and they're wearing these costumes, yeah, I don't like them. Like, it's interesting how, like, in a technical sense, they're not necessarily showing that much more cleavage than they are in their original costumes, but there is, I just think, a big psychological difference between here is like an insane plunging neckline, and here is we have like opened up just that middle section that is designed only to show cleavage. This is obviously, if you know American comic books, this is the Power Girl costume problem, or Power Girl is a clone of Supergirl. Power Girl's not that important, I guess. But her costume has that exact design. There is an absolutely infamous comic book panel from the 2000s where she is trying to explain this to Superman. And she's like, it's so like male writer trying to justify the incredibly sexist character design of this character that just exposes her cleavage in the most like weird way possible at all times. And she's like, oh, well, I wanted to have an S or something that was like a symbol that symbolizes who I was. And so I left that empty until I could figure out what it was, and I just never have. And she's like very emotional about it. You're like, no, it's that way so that you get some dirty old men to fucking buy your comic book to look at boobs. That's why the costume's designed the way it is. And I think it's just when you're only opening that section, it becomes fetishistic, right?
Yeah.
It is like it's a piece of fetish gear in order to accentuate and highlight and draw attention specifically to these sexualized elements in such an explicit way that no human being would fucking wear this because it doesn't make any sense. Whereas like the original costumes, obviously it shows a lot of skin. Obviously it's meant to be very sexy, but the original costumes look like what female professional wrestlers wear. Like it's part of that, like the original concept of the characters. And so it's a lot easier for me to accept them walking around dressed like that, given like as their sort of like outfit or whatever, versus this, it's so fetishized, and then especially around the bottoms where there's just like weird straps that are exposing different parts of their like thighs and stuff in a way that just makes no sense. Like I'm just not a big fan of this version of the uniforms, and always kind of, and I'm bummed that this is like what the uniforms are then, because all the later stuff uses some variation of this, rather than the original ones, which I think are better.
I think that is all completely correct. I think when you look at the original uniforms, like, yes, they are titillating in certain ways, but they feel like playful, like something the character would choose to wear for that purpose, for their own, like, sense of sexuality, and also for functionality. Like, the popped collar looks much more comfortable than the weird, like, closed collar with the big open chest of the new uniforms. I do think it can be a subtle difference in some ways, but I think it's like a very instructive difference on like pure male gaze versus we're also thinking about the character and their own reality, right? And again, I agree with you that I think in the movie it works fine because it's not there that long. The movie has such an extreme aesthetic to begin with that like I think it being dialed up from the TV show just feels like fine in that way, versus when it's the OVA and these are just stories that could have been told in that other format, then I do think it feels like much weirder for it to be their normal day-to-day attire. And I also just think that the costumes in the show look better. I just think they look better. I think they look better in animation. I think the character's movement is less inhibited because it looks like they have more freedom of motion, which they would in those costumes, all of that stuff. For Project Eden specifically, again, it gets them out of those pretty fast. It gets them into various states of undress where they've got like a towel or a piece of cloth or something. I do think, as much as I don't like how that scene ends, the scene where they are dangling and they're pulling Yuri up by like that, and it's kind of showing her butt, but it's not in a sexualized way, it's in a very funny way. I think that scene is very funny, and I think it's drawn in a very physically like comedic manner. And then it builds to, again, the mech suits they get at the end, which are such a cool like extension of the basic costume and all of that, that's just awesome. So overall in the movie I don't really have a problem with it, but in the OVA number 2 I do.
Yeah. One other thing with the movie, let's talk about Professor Wattsman.
Oh yeah,
who
Wattsman?
Yes, the character that leads to, I think, my favorite cut in anything I have ever watched, any movie ever, is when Carson D. Carson is like, "It's Professor Wattsman, Professor Wattsman, Professor Wattsman, Wattsman." Wattsman! And the fucking soundtrack goes, and the dude looks at the camera and his eyes like glasses flash. It is the best cut ever with the soundtrack. And 2, it is the greatest introduction to your antagonist in the history of movies. is the like Wattsman, 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 Wattsman. It's just, it's so, I like
it's so good.
Both times I've watched this movie, when I hit that point, I rewound and rewatched it multiple times because it's just, the energy of it's so powerful. One other thing, because I was taking screenshots, I noticed, and I started going through some Watchmen scenes frame by frame, is there's some like little Easter eggs in the insane scrolling text on his like glasses or whatever. If you look at my screenshots, Jonathan, you can see some of them, where there's one that's only on there for like one frame, where the text on his glasses in Japanese says something like, I have diarrhea, basically, like ima onaka kawashi. It's like,
oh yeah, I'm seeing it here. Yeah,
diarrhea. Mainichi gerio okuteimasu okage blah 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 blah. Toilet no something taihen nano. So it's like, because I ate something that like gave me diarrhea every day. Is really hard, and it's really rough on my toilet. What it says on his glasses for a single frame, which is wild. There's another frame that just says Dragon Quest on the left for no discernible reason, which is great. There's one that's got what looks like a storyline chart or something. It has the word denouement. It's got end title and soundtrack on there. Like, there's just like some wild shit that pops up on that dude's glasses. But Professor Wattsman, who's voiced by all-time legend Otsuka Chiko, father of Otsuka Akio, but also voice actor in a billion things. He's the original version of Goemon from Lupin's Third Part 1. He's Tao Pai Pai in Dragon Ball. He's Dr. Eggman, or the original voice of Dr. Eggman. He has passed away a while ago. And then I also put in for you, Jonathan, he's Goldie Roger, or the original Goldie Roger voice in One Piece.
That is a fairly significant voice in the history of One Piece. He says the first line of the show.
Yes.
But yes, no, I mean, it is Otsuka Chikao, and he's amazing. I couldn't place him. It's such a crazy performance. Like, the closest Otsuka Chikao I've heard to this is Dr. Eggman, but even that is less of a crazy character voice than Professor Wattsman. I would not have guessed this was Otsuka Chikao. Like, it is so, like, in a high pitch. It sounds, I thought it was Shigeru Chiba for a little bit.
Yes.
Like, I thought it might have, because it's much more like a Chiba for performance. But it is, like, it being Otsuka Chikao, there's just an extra level of weird. It is amazing. I love the character. It is like Dr. Strangelove. Dr. Strangelove is already a character dialed up to 11 by Peter Sellers, but just, like, keep turning that dial up, where he is so bizarre. He's got this weird little bony body. He bathes in a ball pit, a pink ball pit. He has all these, basically USB ports he's put all over his body so he can hook into everything, which is such a cool, like, rethought version of the like mad scientist thing, because sometimes you get like the big thing on their head, or you get that their brain is big so it's like swollen. There's all sorts of versions of this, right? But I love that he has just turned his body into this like data center, and he keeps plugging and unplugging. He's got the crazy glasses, he's got the big puppet hands that he's using to like literally puppeteer the environment and like grab at the characters. Oh my god, what an amazing villain. He is like, also, I feel like, weirdly, even though you couldn't do this character in live action, kind of the platonic ideal of a James Bond villain also. Because it is, like, insane, deformed, but also, like, absolutely unforgettable. What I'm saying is we need, Mads Mikkelsen to do this Professor Wattsman in the live action remake of Dirty Pair, the movie Project Eden.
that is a live action remake I would not envy someone attempting to make. But yeah, no, Professor Watson, just, God, the energy this character brings to this movie is fucking legendary to me. Like, it's just so good. The character design, the crazy glasses, the whole thing that he is like plugged into his equipment at all times and is, this like weird puppeteer, but that he's also just a fucking moron. And this is something that really stood out to me watching it this time, because the first time I watched Dirty Pair, the movie, this AI bullshit was not the way that it is right now. And the character is like in our current context, it would make me think of AI. I think it works in any context, but he is such a great version of your like insane industrialist, where I think we just have these cycles post-industrial revolution where technology has so transformed human life and human civilization that we just have these people who like are so obsessive and so committed to whatever this like industrial technological vision is for humanity's future that they just completely lose sight of like the whole reality and the whole world. And so there's this great comedy of this character where, it's the kind of like a linchpin moment in the movie is when he's taking his very disturbing pink bubble pit bath that has a weird machine that vibrates his little bubble pit, and he's just like, and he's very delighted by it. It's very unnerving. But then he sees that like in fantastic footage of like the digitized outlines of UDK and Carson D. Carson fighting the monsters, and he makes this mistake of thinking, oh, it's like this new evolution. They're the perfect life form. And he goes and captures them. And he thinks what's happened is that he has succeeded in his insane endeavors to use these weird like dinosaur egg fossil thingies, like space dinosaurs that he's turning into these monsters, trying to create what he thinks is the next stage of human evolution. And what he looks at and can't comprehend how incredible it is just two random fucking people. It's just Carson and Kay. Who are, they're impressive people, but they're just fucking people. And I think it so speaks to, especially in our current moment, this like thing that these AI companies do where they're like, look at like what these models can do after like destroying an entire rainforest and spending our company $1 billion when you type like a sentence into it and all this shit. And we're driving, the planet to environmental destruction. But we can produce an answer with like 80% accuracy to some sort of like bullshit question to tell you about who was in, the searchers or whatever, like whatever random query you decide to give their model. And then meanwhile, you look at like a fucking, I don't know, an 8-year-old kid, and that 8-year-old kid is able to do things that your model couldn't fucking conceptualize. And fuck a kid. Like, well, okay, no, that's a weird way to phrase that. But it doesn't need to be a human child. It can be an insect. Like, the most basic forms of life are capable of intelligence that are so far beyond whatever fucking AI models you can create, And there is that, this is what I felt when Xbox debuted their fucking weird AI shit. And they're like, and you can play the most nightmarish version of Quake 2 you would ever, like, scared, like, dream up in your worst imagination. Or, you could just go load up Steam and play Quake 2. I don't know. We don't need an AI to try to make a facsimile of Quake 2. You can just have Quake 2. And there is this, I get that sensation when he is looking at regular people. He's like, oh my God, look at these like technological marvels. Like I finally, my genius has done it. And it's like, my man, if you want to make a person, just go find like a nice lady who likes you. It's like people have been making people for a very long time. It's not that complicated. And it's just very funny to me, this character, and it comes down to the very end of the movie, which as much as I kind of cringe at some of like the biological essentialist man-woman shit this movie does, I do crack up at the like Kay and Carson have their little like nice flirtatious thing at the end. And Professor Watson sees it, is like, oh, it's the birth of a new universe. And it's his sort of maybe finally realizing, the reality of the world that he lives in and the complexity of the natural world that so outstrips like what our technology can even like reach at. And I think there is like just a great sort of like buffoonish quality to the character that has, I think, a legitimate resonance, both in the moment of the 80s, which is such a consumerist-driven culture with all this, like, crazy, like, you know, that's like your early attempts at making VR and all this kind of shit come from this period. And so it's very, I think, applicable for the moment it comes out in, but it continues to be applicable to our current world in some very poignant ways of this character and his just idiotic nature and his inability to see what should like the amazing shit that should be right in front of him because he's so blind to everything around him. And it's just like, you know, we have, you know, our version of Professor Watson is just fucking Sam Altman or whatever, and it's way more boring. I wish that our crazy fucking AI people were more like this guy, because at least they'd be entertaining.
But no, it is so true. That scene where he is looking at the, like, that digitization and he says, oh my God, the new life form. It is such a perfect, you know, finger on the pulse encapsulation of what I, you know, like to call the Emperor has no clothes scenario of, you know, AI and tech bros looking at something objectively unexceptional and usually objectively bad and having to look at it and go, oh my God, look at what we've created. It's amazing. It's the future. And then a lot of people have to, you know, buy into it because, you know, a lot of journalists have decided they're stenographers, not actual champions of truth. And it gets out there. And then you actually look at it like, oh no, that's the Emperor's, you know, buck-ass naked. There are no clothes. And it is, I do love how much it just seems to encapsulate that sensation in a way that I just love when you see a piece of media nail something like that. And in this case, they couldn't have anticipated our exact moment. But as you say, there's a lot of stuff going on, even in the 80s, that anticipates where we're going.
Yes. Yeah. So Professor Watson, 10 out of 10 character. I fucking love that dude and his whole weird shit he's on about.
I do enjoy Carson D. Carson as hard as they try to push him. I do think there's fun. I do think the performance is great. It's Mori Katsuji, who we talked about last time, because he is two of the hunks in Dirty Pair. He is Daniel Cesar in episode 23. And no, I guess we'll talk about him again soon, because he's the fiance in the Godfather episode of the OVA. But then he was also Garma in Gundam. And he's just such a fun actor. I think it is a very fun performance. It is such a fucking 80s character. Oh my God.
Yes.
Like, this is a character, there's so many 80s American actors you could imagine playing. And, you know, he does have some good moments. I like that his whole, thing is he wants to get this old bottle of wine. I love the scene where he goes to, you know, finish it off and he's got his bazooka and his bottle of wine and he takes a drink and then fires. And it does feel like something that you would see Schwarzenegger do in Predator or something. It's insane.
Yeah. And I do like, you know, the narrative pairing of, like, you know, having this scientist who is like desperately just trying to make something that's just a regular person, but he just creates these monsters over and over again, including that fantastic scene where he creates this woman that comes out that then just transforms into the monster and fucking disintegrates, which is a great piece of animation. But that's, you know, the opposite of that is you have Carson D. Carson, who's this, like, really amazing, like, guy, but who's also just, like, a guy, right? He's just this, like, petty thief or whatever who's desperately trying to be a pro, you know, and all that, like, crazy whatever his background is. But the whole reason he's on this mission is for this sort of, like, abstract, intangible notion of wanting to live up to his own vision of what he can be. And there's something so very, like, human about this idea that he wants to get this bottle of wine, not because the wine was worth a lot of money, not because of the story that this wine has, that it's this wine made, you know, after the French victory in World War II and all this stuff that is supposed to bring you victory and glory. He wants it because it is a way for him to make up for this one failure that he can't let go of. And that is this, like, you know, very human, organic thing that shows you, like, what real life is compared to these weird fucking monsters that Professor Watson can't help but create, because Professor Watson has, you know, he only wants this wine for this very superficial thing of he does want it for the, like, the mythology of it, I think, is the clear implication of he wants it for the symbolic of I want it to bring me victory, but he also just wants to drink it once he's won. Whereas for Carson D. Carson, the fucking wine doesn't matter. It's what the wine represents that's important, and that is a, like, intangible truth about the world that Professor Watson can't access. And so I do think that there is, like, you know, as much as I'll criticize the movie for a lot of its sexist ideology, it has. Like, I do think it's important to give the movie a lot of credit with what it is doing narratively, because it is doing these things narratively and it's doing them actively. I maybe don't like some of the conclusions it comes to with men and women and that kind of stuff, but it is not an instance of where it's all just like we created some great images and we put it to some great music. It is also like those things are coherently coming all together to tell a bigger narrative story that has, like, I think very important and like powerful themes. And so like it is a really like phenomenal movie in those respects, even if in some of the specific directions it ends up in I don't love. I think it's the thing that makes this movie so good, is that it's not just that it looks good and that it sounds good, is that those things are all very intelligently being put together to tell this thing with Carson D. Carson and Professor Wattsman and all of its biotechnological bullshit that the movie's on about. It's all doing it very purposefully.
Indeed. And again, lest it go unsaid, this is among the most impressive pieces of animation I've ever seen.
Yep.
It is unreal. Just on like your standard level of like character animation of animated bodies in motion, it is unbelievably exceptional how many things they have these characters do while always feeling resolutely, I don't even want to say on model because that sounds too rigid, but like the verisimilitude is so high of what you're looking at when these bodies are in motion, how expressive they are, how much acting is done through the animation, because this is one where the voice acting is obviously great, but it does, I think, other than for Professor Wattsman, I think take a backseat to the animated version of the characters, of the pure, like, visual side of Kei and Yuri. And there's just, like, in your screenshot gallery, Sean, there's so many good just, like, images of, like, man, they captured the essence of Kei in that shot, in, like, how she looks in her face. Or, like, Yuri's last little smile at the end of the movie as they fly away where she does a wink. That is such a perfect, animation cell of Yuri. And these are true throughout. But then, the sheer detail of everything in Wattsman's lab and all the mechanical designs, the little mech suits they have at the end, the monsters by that mangaka, which looks so, like, unique and interesting. I love all the abstraction where, they'll do, again, a thing very common to anime where in a moment of action, the background will disappear and there will be something more abstract behind it. Often that is just a solid color in anime or some, like, maybe speed lines or hatch lines. But here, those are like these, almost like, I don't even know what you would call them. They look like Oscar Fischinger paintings, like from his, like an optical poem, or he also did some of the stuff at the beginning of Fantasia, where there are these, like, abstract shapes and colors, like, moving in tandem with the characters, and they just look so fucking good. I wish I could have some of those backgrounds, like, as wallpapers. They just look unreal. And so it's just every inch of this movie aesthetically, wherever you poke at it, it pokes back with something fucking ferocious. Like, I think another thing I would compare this movie to that we've watched is Lupin III, The Fuma Conspiracy, which is that OVA that is made by Otsuka Yasuo and basically a bunch of top-notch animators. It lost its director early on. It doesn't have that good a story. I think, like, that one has a much bigger narrative, like, set of problems than Project Eden does. But it is this thing where, like, the primary thing you're watching it for is the animation. And the animation is so exceptional that it can overcome most narrative problems. I think Project Eden is more accomplished on, like, narrative, pacing, all of that stuff. But I do think, like, that is another place where you're just like, oh my god, this is like some of the world's best animators just cutting loose and giving a masterclass in how to do these things, and it blows your mind.
Yeah, all those things you're talking about, 100% I echo. Like, those fucking streaks of paint as the backgrounds for the action scenes are so fucking cool and so vibrant. It's like the best version of that technique I've ever seen. It's so cool. I love all the technical gizmos and stuff, and the, like, when they show the, like, computer screens that have the digitized readouts, like, that stuff is so aesthetically potent. And they do some of the action scenes where they will, like, match cut to, like, the full versions of the characters doing the actions, and then this abstracted version of, like, the wireframes basically doing it, which is all fucking awesome. But then you do have, we have to once again give props to the insane action climax where, Carson is stabbed, which is a really powerful moment. He gets they have the last conversation. Well, what you think is the last conversation between him and Kei. He then gets the little mech suit from Kei, has his big last stand where he takes the swig and fires the rockets away. Kay turns, sees the explosion, and right as the explosion goes, everything slows down, and then you hear the soundtrack go, over the top, do-do-do-do-do-do, and it's like, when Over the Top comes in and you're in slow motion, it is such a transcendental moment in this movie to me, where you're just like transported to this like ultimate plane where I just remember my jaw hitting the floor when I realized like, oh, this whole sequence is in slow motion. It's not Kay's reaction. It's not like, just like the little, like the details of the rockets on Yuri's suit popping up and loading in and all this stuff. It's like, no, they're doing this whole sequence and they're coming through and they're like cutting through the monsters, blowing up the door, cutting through the hand that comes down to grab them and all this shit. There's that one shot that's just like, man, I feel bad for the animator that had to do this, where Kay swings in and kicks the glass dome that Professor Watson is in, and it shatters. But it shatters in slow motion. And so there's like, all these frames of the little shards of glass shooting outwards as Kay comes in, and all the stuff of her swinging at Professor Watson and cutting the wires, and then that sort of fake out where it looks like she's going to kill him at the end. And obviously, like, ultimately she didn't kill him. She just like cut him out or whatever. But like that sequence, it's just one of the most audacious things I have ever seen in an animated production. It is so insane. I just can't believe they did it. And again, this is fucking the mid-'80s, Like, if you did this today, like an example of something similar to this today that is also hugely impressive is in the most recent Demon Slayer thing, where you have that explosion in that last episode that blows up the manor and all of that. An incredible, like, piece of work. But that's obviously leveraging all of our modern technology and 3D animation, and like there's clearly physics simulations that they're using to support that and stuff. This is all fucking, some dude had to sit down and draw all of these pieces of glass, and then he had to get another piece of paper and draw all of those pieces of glass again, but they moved ever so slightly. just slightly moved, right? Like, it's just the amount of effort that went in, and how seamless and perfect it looks, and how well it like matches the vibes with the music and all of that. Like, the whole sequence is so sublime. It is just jaw-dropping, and it was the thing I was most excited to watch this movie again, was just to get to that scene again. And it did not disappoint watching it several years later, because it is still one of the coolest things I've ever seen in a movie.
Completely agree. When you think about, again, what is the goal, the end result of slow motion? It is to emphasize the physicality of motion with a greater sense of detail than you would get from your normal sort of sight or speed, because you have literally more frames of that thing captured that you are seeing slowed down. And then when you think of like, okay, now how do we achieve that sensibility in animation? It really means drawing more, but it also means drawing more. You have to figure out the exact pace, because there's a century of, animators figuring out exactly how to draw physicality that feels verisimilitudinous at 24 frames per second.
Yes.
The Disney animators wrote a whole book on this, The Illusion of Life, that is all about the things that they kind of had to invent out of themselves, of, squash and stretch and all of those sorts of things, right? And how to figure out those physicalities. Of course, Japanese animators had to, go through all of this themselves and figure out, how does a walk cycle look good and look physical. Now throw all of that out, because you're not doing it at 24 frames per second. You're doing it in slow motion. And so you have to like take and extend all of those rules and laws. And it's just, again, it boggles the mind. It looks so good. It is of such a amazing union with the music. You've really never seen anything like it if you haven't seen this movie. And man, this movie, worth fucking watching. God, what a thing. What a thing.
Yes. And then after all that, you're also treated to, the movie's not satisfied just to have the best opening piece of animation ever. It's also wants to have the best piece of animation for, like, what the credits look like. Because then you have that logo thing comes in of UD and K that, like, dash into the sides that looks like, like a VHS company logo or something. But then that transforms into, like, a triangle shape that then turns into a martini glass that then you get, like, some, wine or something poured into it. It then separates into two glasses to go to either side. A glass slipper comes up to the back, and then Yuri and Kay fade in, and they're like, it's like they're like bathing in the giant wine glasses thing, which obviously is like a reference to various like live pieces of art that have happened over the years. And you get the credits play, and then interspersed within the credits, you get the snapshots of the characters with the actor and the character name on it, which is a cool touch. It's also a funny touch for a movie that only has 4 characters that actually matter, and then a bunch of people that by the time you get to the credits, you forgot were in the movie that they talked in the very first scene. And then as it goes through and those flashes happen, the colors change throughout. So it's slowly shifting the color space until it ends on this very vivid red. The Kay and Yuri disappear. The glasses come together and turn into a Y. And then that Y is the Y of Dirty Pair. And it gives you the logo of the movie again. And it's fucking hell yes, dude. Again, this is a movie you got to watch all the way through the credits. There's no, we're cutting to black, motherfucker. No, we are using every single second of this movie to give you a complete holistic aesthetic experience. And if we've got, a couple of minutes of the ending with credits, well, we're going to use that space too. And it's fucking awesome.
Yes. No, the martini glass thing is it's martini glasses they're in. And that is an old, basically burlesque show thing.
Yes.
In terms of what people listening to this might know, is there's a recent Taylor Swift music video for Bejeweled that does this. And I think she partnered with an actual burlesque dancer to do that sequence. It's her and another woman. Because it is that thing where you have a martini glass on either side of the stage that is filled with presumably actually water and not, champagne or something. And then are in and they're doing the thing with their legs are out. And it's such an old reference in because it comes from burlesque. It's in a lot of different movies and musicals. It's a kind of image you'll see in James Bond openings too. It's kind of hard to say where that exactly started, but it was fascinating to see that here and how well animated that is, and then how cool that they give every character their own individual title card, which is again something you just don't see in anime all that often. It's great.
Yes, and then obviously it's also to the song Pas de Deux, which is also an absolute banger.
Yes.
Yeah. There's obviously I have my issues with some areas of this movie, but it turns out overall it's really quite good.
It's incredible. You want to move on and talk about the big group of OVAs we have for today, Sean?
Yes, so let's continue on. So let's talk about Dirty Pair, the OVA series, Dirty Pair 2, Dirty Pair Season 2, however you want to refer to this. So this is your 10-episode production that starts after the movie. So following the production of the movie, just to give some history here, it was decided to continue the series in the form of these 10 OVAs. Mashimo, the director of the film, recommended Katsuyoshi Yatabe, who is the unit director. Again, that's also the guy whose interviews I read to get a lot of this information. He asked him to become the director for this OVA project. And I thought an interesting thing that Katsuyoshi says in that interview is that Mashimo likened it to Dirty Pair being like James Bond, which, obviously that opening is not like 007 coincidentally. Obviously Mashimo was familiar with all that stuff. And he said that, hey, we should have a different creative voice doing all the different Dirty Pair stuff, because the TV series had been done by a different director. The TV series had technically 2 directors over its lifetime, that the first director stayed on, but you also had Kashimo come in. You have Affair of Nolandia as a different director, Project Eden is a different director, and so it's hey, let's have a different person do this as well. And also across those, you have 3 different studios that that those directors come from, which is Sunrise, TMS, and Tatsunoko. So you've got a lot of different blood basically coming in and doing different takes on Dirty Pair. For the OVA, each release of the OVAs had 2 episodes on it, which I think was smart, rather than doing what, some of OVAs at this period would do, which is just to have double length style episodes. This is no, we'll do 2 episodes, each of those on one release. And Katsuyoshi wanted each release to have one kind of relatively standard Dirty Pair episode, and then one more experimental or more kind of genre style episode, meaning you have your kind of rom-com Godfather episode. He described this episode as film noir. I don't know if film noir is exactly what I would use, but
no, it's not.
It's the darker one. I think it's the last episode. When I got to it, I was oh, I guess this is the episode he was talking about, because it's the one where they fucking blast the dude at the end. Is the one that he was talking about there. It's episode 9 is the one that he And maybe I should have looked back at that after I watched it. Maybe film noir was just a bad translation by me. But regardless, like thinking of like different kind of genre styles and very different settings. And so kind of pairing those up together. And then Katsuyoshi brought back a lot of the animation staff who worked on the movie and brought them back to work on the OVA. So there's a lot of continuity between the movie production and the OVA productions. Obviously, that extends to the character designs with the outfits and all of that as well. Now that Katsuyoshi is the director, let's give a little bit more background on kind of his history and where he comes from. So he's a Sunrise guy. So he began working at Sunrise in the late 70s and began storyboarding and directing episodes, starting with Space Runway Ideon in 1980. He was also a very prominent episode director on lots of things throughout the 80s. He worked on a lot of the Sunrise subcontracted episodes of Urusei Yatsura, because everybody worked on Urusei Yatsura. That's just a thing that was very clearly apparent to me doing research for all these shows from the 80s and 90s. He did a lot of work on Armored Trooper Bottoms, Double Zeta Gundam, so basically any of those kind of like mid to late 80s productions, he had a hand in as an episode director and storyboard artist. The Dirty Pair OVAs was the first project he was the chief director on, but his second project, the thing he would work on after this, would be the thing he'd be most well known for, which is Yusha X Kaiser, or the Brave X Kaiser. This series launched a long partnership between Sunrise and the toy company Takara, or Takara Tomy. And the series is the Yusha series in Japan, or Brave series of super robot shows that were popular throughout the 90s. And Katsuyoshi directed the first 3 of the 8 shows. And the people who worked on the later ones all worked on this OVA, which we'll see as well. So if you're a fan of those, I think Yusha Gao Geiger would be the most popular. If people have heard of any of them, it's probably that one, which is one of the later ones. Katsuyoshi, I don't think, worked on that one. But these are like very, very popular 90s super robot shows. And so that's kind of what this dude's most known for. Series composition. This does have a series composition credit, even though each episode has its own writer. But unlike the first show, they do have a series composition credit, which is Hoshiyama. Again, he's like your hardcore Sunrise dude who did fucking all the good episodes from Gundam Turn A, and all that kind of stuff. So, a very steady hand in terms of writer, and he did multiple of the episodes. Character design chief animation director, once again, is Dokide Tsukasa, because if you can't do Dirty Pair without this guy, as far as I'm concerned. And then music is interesting. So the music is credited to 2 people. One is Kimori Toshiyuki, who was the composer of the original show. You also have another credit, though, which is Tanaka Kohei, whom we have talked about, obviously, a lot. He is, one of those great composers, did, G Gundam, One Piece, Gravity Rush, Sakura Tyson, like all this really great stuff.
Gunbuster, which we talked about 2 weeks ago.
Exactly. We can't get away from him, which is great because his music's really good. But, I think basically the situation, if you're kind of reading between the lines, Kimono Toshiyuki, he passed away in April 1988, which would be after these OVAs, but he died from an illness. So I am guessing likely what happened is that at some point he could not work anymore, and they brought Tanaka Kohei in. Now, a lot of the music is music from the original show. There are what I believe are new Kimori compositions, and then there are also new Tanaka Kohei compositions. So it's kind of like a smorgasbord of music, of returning music and new music. The music, I think, generally is very good, whether it's the old ones or the new ones. And I cannot tell you exactly where the Tanaka Kohei ones are or not, but that's kind of what we're doing with the music composition credit here.
Yes. The music is an unalloyed good in this season. It's all great. And the opening and ending, too, which are just fantastic. In fact, I do think the ending is my favorite of the Dirty Pair endings. I still think, Russian Roulette is the best opening, but that ending with, just because I love the animation, basically, is starting on Mugi. Mugi has a much bigger role in Dirty Pair 2, and it's great. He's in the Eyecatch. He's with them on all their adventures. Mugi, if you like Mugi, you will like Dirty Pair 2, but I really like that ending as well. And the opening, By Yourself, by Morikawa Miho, has the bass line from Thriller, which is just fun. The song isn't anything like Thriller, but it's got the same bass line, and I enjoyed the hell out of that.
Yes, So you have By Yourself. It is very funny because you do get that just 5 or so whatever seconds of the song. You just do 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 do, and you're like, I have definitely heard this.
Yes.
It's like, this is one of the most iconic bass lines ever. The only notable change is in Thriller, it's like do 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 do, because you have a percussion hit instead.
Yeah.
And this is no, we'll finish out with an actual note on the bass guitar. That's the only change. Obviously, the rest of the song is very different. But yes, that By Yourself is sung by Morikawa Miho, who is someone who I've been hearing a lot relatively recently, because she also did the opening and ending themes to Nadia, The Secret of Blue Water, which you have not heard those openings and endings. They are really, really fucking good. They are really, really, really fucking good. So she's got a great voice. She is quite a bit younger here, or she sounds quite a bit younger. And one thing that's interesting, so she's a pop singer. Both of these singers, for the second one is Nito Yuko. Both of them were signed up with VAP Records, which is a subsidiary of a subsidiary of Nihon TV. So you have Nihon TV, which is the thing that produced Dirty Pair. They have a subsidiary called VAP, which made their home video releases. And that's the company that then when they did the OVAs was like, oh, and we'll do episode 25, 26, all that. They have a subsidiary, which is VAP Records, which was releasing music in the mid-'80s, and that's who was signed up for this. So it's like there's just like a long company trail that I was following, like, oh, this is interesting. But so they kind of just pulled these young artists that were like young, super young. I think they're both teenagers at this time, to do these songs. But they're both fantastic. I really like By Yourself and Akikata no Summertime, or From Fall to Summertime, basically is what that would mean. Both are fantastic. And I think I'd agree, Akikata no Summertime is probably my favorite ending song for Dirty Pair. It's just got a slightly, it's still very 80s, but it's a different kind of 80s song, you know? This is the ba 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 woo. It's just got a really good energy to it. So, and the animations for both of them are also very, very good.
Yes.
So
absolutely.
let's get into these OVAs. So I think we can
wait a second. Can we just do some overall thoughts before we go episode by episode?
Oh, sure. Yes.
Yeah. Because I like Dirty Pair 2 a lot. I think it's still a very good show. I do think when you talked about that these were distributed as 2-episode tapes, so you would have had 5 of these, and that their goal was to kind of have more standard Dirty Pair episodes paired with more experimental ones. I think that's a really cool idea they had. I will say, though, other than the poker one not poker, but the gambling one in space, which is really good, I think the standard Dirty Pair episodes are pretty subpar, in terms of story. I don't think they're very interesting. The Prison Revolt one, or the one with the kids who are stealing the base, sometimes they're fun ideas that don't feel fully articulated. I do think generally the ones that are more out there, like the Halloween party, or the crazy one with the god that they have to fight, or particularly episode 9, which is basically their Vietnam episode that has a lot of aesthetic similarities to Gundam.
08th MS Team?
Yeah, the 08th MS Team, that one. I think all of those are fantastic and some of my favorite Dirty Pair episodes. And when it is doing something notably different for Dirty Pair, I think this show is really good. When it is sort of going back to the well of what you would more expect from the original show, I think generally those episodes, other than the gambling one, which is really good, feel pretty inferior to what you would have gotten on the TV show.
I think I agree with that. I don't think any of them are bad.
No.
But I definitely would agree that the more stock style Dirty Pair episodes don't feel as good as their equivalent kind of episodes from the original. But some of those experimental ones are really good. And there are a couple of Dirty Pair 2 episodes that are just absolutely fantastic. But it is definitely less consistent in quality than the original show was. So some of these episodes I don't think we'll have a whole bunch to say about, but let's run through these. So the first episode is Prison Revolt, We Hate Stubborn People, written by Hoshiyama Hiroyuki, storyboards by Dokute Tsukasa, and directed by Ito Yoshiki. So this is interesting, partially because this is one of the only storyboarding credits that Dokute Tsukasa has. I think, from what I read on the interview, he really was interested in storyboarding because he hadn't done it much, because he's mostly a character design and animation guy. But it seems I don't think that he particularly liked storyboarding ultimately, because he went back to mostly just being an animator, which makes sense because some people are better at some things than others. I don't necessarily think that the storyboarding is bad here. In fact, I think there's lots of really great animation in this episode. I think the animation of episode 1 is notably really strong, particularly the action stuff. There's a lot of Starship Troopers energy here, because you've got all these Space Marines that very much look like, if you've seen some of the Japanese designs of the power suits from Starship Troopers, which is a clear precursor to your Gundams and stuff like that. It's very similar to the kind of power suits they have here. And they're jumping in and they're, to go into this prison. There's another kind of Starship Troopers-y-ness to this, which there's a weird, authoritarian, we got to put down the prison revolt shit that's going on here that is also very like the book Starship Troopers and not the Paul Verhoeven, we're doing satires of the authoritarian shit from the book of Starship Troopers. So it's got Starship Troopers and kind of energy in two different ways. But the animation of this whole sequence where they're going into the prison and there's like this column of like planetary gas that the ship goes in, and then Yuri and Kay like jump out and they're like surfing down it. Like that shit looks fucking awesome. So I think there's lots of cool animation here and cool action. The problem is I think the story for this episode is so thin. Like it's so like there is a prison revolt. There is a guard in the prison revolt. They have to get the guard. The guard is like a dick and he wants to kill all the prisoners, but the dirty pair kind of get him out. And that's like the whole episode. There's just like, it feels like a really inferior version to episode 1 from the original show, which was also all madcap action. But I think the simplistic plot of that episode supported the madcap action better than this, where I think you really want like more of what's going on with this prison break. Like who, like, it feels like there should be a twist here at some point, especially because they do like go out of their way to make the warden an absolute piece of shit who starts complaining about like, oh, this prison break's going to ruin my severance pay and all this shit. And he starts trying to kill all the prisoners. But the story never goes anywhere with that. And so it just feels like half of a story told with a bunch of very well animated action on top of it, but without a good story to support that action, even a good simple story to support the action. It's kind of my take on this episode.
Yes, I would agree with that completely. It's got some spectacular animation. The stuff where the prison is surrounded by this like pit of lava and they're like surfing down the side of it, all of that's really cool. But it is maybe the flattest Dirty Pair story of anything in all of the Dirty Pair, universe, because it is just, they start, they're going to save this guy, they end, they save the guy, but nothing changes in the dynamics. Like, there really desperately needs to be a second act twist where that guy is the bad guy and the Dirty Pair turn on him and help some of the prisoners or something. It doesn't have to be that specifically, although that would, I feel like, be more politically palatable to me personally. But it has to be something. There's like, clearly you need something to happen in the episode that changes the dynamics, because it's just way too flat a story. And by the end, I definitely, as good as the animation was, there's so little to hold on to that my eyes were kind of glazing over on this one. This is probably my least favorite episode of Dirty Pair 2.
Yeah, I think I'd probably agree with that. It's like, it is the only episode of Dirty Pair other than the two-parters that like does not, from the original show, that like has the rare problem of there's not enough going on to fill the episode. Like, that's not a thing that Dirty Pair usually has an issue with.
No.
If anything, it'll be the opposite direction. You do have a couple of notable guest stars, just to shout them out. You have Tatsuya Naoki plays Dr. Kubelstein, who is Q, because there is a kind of intro to this episode that sets up a little like some new 3WA characters that pop up a little bit. Q is in the Godfather style episode as well later. This actor is Oolong from the original Dragon Ball. So that's cool. You do also have Jeff, who is a space marine, and he's just called Jeff, which is, you can have some people with crazy names in Dirty Pair, like Clicky Goldstein, and you can also have a guy named Jeff. It's fine. And Jeff is voiced by Shimada Bean, who is Patmos Shirako from Zeta Gundam and Broly from Dragon Ball, amongst like lots of other things, but of stuff we've talked about. Those are the two big roles. So you do have a couple of guest stars. I do like that they've got in the Dirty Pair 2 episodes like some other 3WA stuff that pops up later, like you've got Madame Beryl and stuff like that. Like, that's cool. At the very beginning of this episode kind of sets it up, but they're not actually that important to this episode. All right, episode 2 is called Count Us Out, Ultimate Halloween Party. This is written by Sasamoto Yuichi, directed by, with storyboards by Takamatsu Shinji, who he's an interesting name because this is the director that would take over for Katsuyoshi on that Yusha series of projects. So he's really known for that, for the Super Robot shows, but we would know him because he is the director that secretly took over the production of Gundam Wing after the original director of Gundam Wing was removed from that project after episode 13 or 14 or so. And so, he's a hero who tried to go in and land that ship, and that show maybe was not great overall, but I would not blame this man He was just trying to go in and get that show over the finish line, and that's a hard fucking thing. The other thing that I would really know him from personally is that he's the director of the first 100 episodes of Gintama, which is a lot of Gintama, but he's the overall director for that section of the show.
Right.
Just to clear, he didn't direct personally every 100 of those episodes, but obviously very, very talented director, and this is one like his really early things that he kind of cut his teeth on, which is cool. So this episode
is
yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
This is another Terminator episode. It's a Terminator at Halloween, because there's a Terminator that has gone rogue, but it is like a Halloween planet. I know it's not literally the whole planet, but they go to the planet. It's Halloween night, so everyone in the city is dressed up. I love, love, love that premise. I think, and it is like aesthetically, this is one of my favorite Dirty Pair stories. I just love seeing all the crazy costumes everybody has. I love the like very autumnal orange color scheme of this episode with like it's all happening at night, and then the whole way that this fight for this robot intersects with these 4 different robberies who have 4 different, Halloween gangs associated with them and are dressed up like characters from Alice in Wonderland or Sleeping Beauty or whatever. And then at the end they have to, fight the robot. This is, I think, a much better version actually of the sort of episode 1 of original Dirty Pair, where there's a lot of madcap stuff going on, but there is still like a lot of narrative material undergirding it and this like really singular aesthetic. I dig the hell out of this episode.
Yeah, this was very fun. I particularly like the ending of this episode, which just goes fucking bonkers. Where there's this hilarious part where they're chasing the Terminator, which is the tactical robot weapon, which is designed to infiltrate, and then after like an hour, however long it is, it turns like killer mode and just starts to blow everything up, and they're trying to chase it. They don't get to it in time, and so it goes into the killer mode and on the top of like a skyscraper, and it like opens up and a couple of guns come out of like big like robot cannons, and then it opens up more and even more come out, and it opens up like again, and there's just like 100 giant fucking guns. It's like a parody of a fucking Spawn cover from the 90s. It's just that era of like, which is like, obviously this predates that kind of 90s like gritty bullshit, but it just has that energy of like we put guns on top of guns on top of guns, and it's very funny. It's an intentional visual gag. And then Yuri and Kay defeat him by like going to the fireworks show and just firing all the fireworks at him, which is fucking cool. And you've got all the people great off in the distance looking at it, and they're seeing like these explosions and the lasers shooting out and cutting through buildings, and they just think it's all part of the fireworks. Like that is a very, very funny and really great action climax. There's one other bit of this that I fucking vibe with hardcore, which is early on in the episode, Kay is like complaining to Yuri that they're working on Halloween, and she starts asking Yuri all these questions about like, what is Halloween? Where did it come from? Yeah. And like Yuri's giving her all these explanations. Then you slowly realize like Kay is trying to figure out why they have to work on Halloween. Why isn't it a fucking work holiday? And it's like, that is how many conversations in your life have you had, whether you're a student that has to go to school or a working adult, being like, why the fuck don't they give us Halloween off? Like, come on. Especially if, luckily I don't have kids, but if you're somebody who has kids and there's going to be trick-or-treating that night, God, that has to fucking suck. If you have to get up the next morning and go to work, it's like, fucking give us Halloween off. Listen to Kay. She's right. She knows what's up.
Absolutely. Always listen to Kay. She knows what she's doing.
Yes. All right, episode 3. Oh God, this one's
the weirdest
crazy
one.
Challenge to the gods. We're not afraid of your divine wrath. Great title, written by Onogi Hiroshi, who is a very prominent anime writer, but we would know him because he is the main writer for Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood. Just like a weird coincidence. He's done a lot of other really great shows. My personal favorite when I was looking at his stuff is he's the big writer for Birdie the Mighty, which if you want to see some cool like kind of superhero action stuff, that's a good series. Storyboards once have been done by Takamatsu Shinji, but there's another really prominent name on this that will pop up a couple other places, because this episode is directed by Watanabe Shinichiro, which if you don't recognize that name, that's the Cowboy Bebop guy, or the Lazarus guy. He's got his new show that's out right now.
And he did several of this season, and his episodes are like ones I really like. So, yeah, I mean, surprise, surprise, Watanabe Shinichiro is really good at directing an episode of anime, and it's weird as fuck. Who knew?
Yes. Yes, he directed some of the best episodes of this, which is not surprising. Obviously, he did lots of stuff at Sunrise during this period. This is before you would really kind of like know his name for really big stuff. but he had worked on lots at this period. But yes, this is just an absolutely insane episode. So this is the one where there is an evil religious cult on this planet that Yudi and Kay have to go investigate because there are some mysterious deaths. During their investigation, they encountered like this insane fucking hell Satan ritual in a destroyed city. And they find out like ultimately that like these people are using technology as like their quote unquote miracles. And they go to a weather control satellite where the god is supposed to be, but the god is like a scientist who's put his consciousness into a giant machine body. And so, as I say in my notes here, in classic JRPG fashion, they kill God. But then in so doing, they destroy the weather satellite and doom the planet below to horrific natural disasters. But this is like the Satan episode of Dirty Pair, and it's pretty cool.
I mean, describing the plot doesn't really do it justice because it is so in the aesthetics. This one has a pretty stark divide between Act 1 and Act 2, where Act 1 is like feels fairly low-key. They're just doing an investigation. They're, like, integrating with the locals. The turning point is they're with this guy. What is the name of there's a truck driver who seems very nice, and he's helping them out, because no one else will drive them around because of the cult. But he's driving them around. He starts to give them a little bit of information about the god, and then his head twists and, like, breaks his neck and sprays them with blood, and he's suddenly dead. Both, at least two of the Watanabe episodes have moments where someone's head basically explodes, shocking everyone and changing the course of the episode. Because from that point on, you realize, like, how fucked up this situation is, that they even show the details of it is that they've put this, like, little metal thing inside everyone's neck that will do this head-twisting maneuver if the god decrees. And so then in the second half of the episode, they infiltrate and they meet the god, who is this, like, it's an insane piece of animation and character design. It like very much takes you out of the normal reality of Dirty Pair, but in a way that I feel like I think it works. I think it works well enough for how weird Dirty Pair can be, and because the episode doesn't start at that point, and it frankly surprised me where it went by the end. And then the whole ritual scene, which, I mean, God, at a certain point looks like something out of Belladonna of Sadness. The whole thing is crazy. This episode is nuts. I kind of love it.
Yeah, it's crazy. I love the whole Satan ritual in the destroyed city, and like the skies are blood red, and there's like evil crows on the fucking trees and shit. It's fucking wild. Yeah, it is. This is also the episode where you realize, like, oh shit, like these OVAs can get very violent because there's like a huge spray of blood. I compared to my notes. It's like the scene in Pulp Fiction where John Travolta accidentally shoots Marvin in the head and sprays the whole front with blood. It's basically like that. It's pretty gnarly. This does also have, though, an incredible pun, which I had to put into my notes because I just thought this was very funny, where Kay looks at Yudi when they're sneaking in, and they, like, knock out two of the cultists and are taking their robes, and Kay says, taking their clothes as a disguise, isn't this a bit old-fashioned? And Yudi looks at her and says, look, can't you call it orthodox? And she uses the English word orthodox if they're sneaking into a church. And I was like, this is
great.
That's a 10 out of 10 pun. Put that on a popsicle stick. It's really good.
Indeed.
All right. Next up, we've got episode 4. They're Only Kids? War Gamers Must Die. Written by Sonoda Hideki, storyboards by Amino Tetsuro, who was one of the storyboarders from the original show, and then directed by Yamaguchi Mihiro. This is the episode where you've got a bunch of kids who have taken over a military research facility that is researching like a crazy gun cannon that will destroy the fabric of space-time, which doesn't feel like a thing you should make. That's just my input. I feel like I wouldn't destroy a thing that destroys all of reality. I think that's like a bit much. But because of that, the Dirty Pair have to go in and get the kids out. They don't want to just murder the kids, but the kids have all the fucking weapons and stuff, so they can't get them out. And then eventually the military is going to come in to kill the kids, and so UDK go in and like basically convince the kids to give up, and they spare their lives. This is like a very like kind of whatever episode. There's some funny bits here and there, but I didn't think it was like amazing.
Yeah, like it's a fun premise. It's got some very good scenes. It doesn't feel like, I feel like in the original show you would have had more sort of twists and turns, or like they would have wrung more comedy out of the situation. My favorite bit is definitely when the kids decide to give demands to the military people like they're in a hostage situation, but they give these incoherent childish demands, one of which is make all shows on TV cartoons. Adult shows are so boring, and I thought that was very funny in a very silly cartoon show to have that moment. But yeah, I think it's one of the ones that where you feel like, it just feels to me like the energy in this series went more towards the more experimentally ones than the ones that are more traditional, and I think that's true in this pair as well.
Yes, I do like the kid being like, turn all TV shows into cartoons. All the adult shows are boring, because I'm like, yes, you're right, kids. All the adult shows are boring. I do like they do show the cartoon that they're watching, and it's like a crayon drawing of Godzilla, a very bad-looking Gamera. It took me a very long time to be like, who the fuck is that? It's Gamera. It's a third monster that I cannot identify for the life of me who the fuck it's supposed to be. I think maybe it's supposed to be a Gyaos from Gamera, but I'm not... If it is, it's a bad Gyaos. There's Giron, who's the giant butcher knife head dude from Gamera, and then on the far end is Rodan, or Radon in Japanese. And I, as a kaiju fan, I was like, cool. There's, it's fun to have Godzilla and friends dancing as little cartoon drawings. There is also, when they're making their demands, the lead kid ends the demands by shouting out, all adults should take a shit and go to sleep. Which is like an amazing thing to say. Like, he literally says "soshite," which the only way you translate that in English is "go take a shit." The subtitles of the version I was watching said like "go take a dump." I'm like, no, that kid said "shit." Come on, you got to translate this properly. I don't know if that's an expression you sometimes say in Japanese or something, but I laughed very hard when I heard that kids say all adults should go take a shit and go to bed, guys. Come on. That's what I want to say to people when I'm fed up with them. Go take a shit and go to bed. Like, leave me alone.
Indeed.
All right.
So I wanted to say, so the next pair, 5 and 6, I think it's interesting. You could define either of them as the more experimental or either of them as the more traditional. I definitely thought, to me, the Casino one felt like the more traditional one, and then the Godfather one was more out there, but I guess you could say either one. The thing is, though, the Casino one is perfect and is the best one.
Yes, I think the Casino one is actually a little bit experimental in terms of how it's delivering its story, but I think they conceptualized it as this is a regular Dirty Pair because it's in space and it's all that kind of stuff. The Godfather one is definitely supposed to be one of the experimental ones, because that's the one he's referring to when he said rom-com in the interview.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah.
But yes. So episode 5, and then No One Played Anymore, which is the more important title than you think you realize when you watch this episode initially. This one's written by Hoshiyama Hiroyuki, the head writer for the whole series. Storyboards by Nishi Fukunaga and directed by Sekita Osamu. So this is our casino episode where Yuri and Kei are called in to investigate a space casino called Medio, after their number one trouble consultant, who's codenamed Kung Fu, gets mysteriously addicted to this like space roulette game, which we'll describe because it's fucking incredible. The Dirty Pair discovers
sort of like space shuffleboard because it sends these things out. It's interesting.
The Dirty Pair discover that the game is rigged and is being used to addict people to the game to slowly bleed them dry of money. Yuri and Kei pose as gamblers to try to expose the scheme. Ultimately, when they expose it, Kung Fu goes on a rampage, and then the nearby planet is destroyed by the resulting barrage of asteroids as the fucking cannon goes crazy. This episode is just fucking amazing. It is just an absolute top-tier episode of Dirty Pair. Everything about it, the pacing, the jokes, the whole plot line in like sci-fi conceptualization of how this fucking casino works is amazing. You've got multiple great costumes over the course of it. It's just like, this feels like a lost episode from the original series, just like to the like best degree. You know, it would be in my top 10 Dirty Pair episodes if you included these, because it's just so fucking perfectly executed.
I completely agree, particularly if you are someone who enjoys just the costume changes on Dirty Pair. They have so many good fits in this one. There's so many good Yuri and Kei interactions, like the one where they're, as you wrote in your notes, needling each other over their fancy dresses, but they're doing it with their backs turned to each other because they're supposed to be undercover, which they are very bad at, as we have seen multiple times. Yuri and Kei don't really do the undercover thing that well. And they're joking about, like, you know, who has spent more on their accessories and all of that. They've also got Moogie in an outfit. I don't know why. I don't know who they're trying to fool, but they've got Moogie in this big pink shirt, blue pants with yellow suspenders and a yellow hat, and it's so good. Again, we haven't talked about it enough, but Mugi is moved much more to the center in Dirty Pair 2, and it's one of my favorite things about this show. Like, he doesn't stay on the ship as much. He's often just out with them on their adventures, and then he also is the star of the Eyecatcher, which is one of the greatest anime eye catches I think I've ever seen. Of the infinitely, like, the Mugi's expanding out and then coming back in for the second eye catch. Oh, it's so good. And I do just love, because Mugi is so embarrassed about what horrible outfit he has been put in. And I don't even know why, because he doesn't really do anything in the episode. It's great.
Yes, Kay just wants to, I think just Kay just wants to accessorize Mugi a little bit.
Yes.
Yeah, it's so good. And this is just one of those episodes that I think proves that, like, if you want to make an episode of Dirty Pair sing, you just got to give a lot of great back and forth between Yuri and Kay. Because, yeah, that scene where they're, like, each in their, like, fancy costumes. Kay, obviously, in her, like, slightly more masculinized one where she's got the hat and the whole, like, kind of dealer outfit on. Then Yuri is in this very beautiful femme kind of dress that's almost like, looks like a mermaid or something. But they're each in these chairs with their backs to each other, and they're leaning back, pushing against each other. And as they're arguing, one will lean more on the other and kind of take dominancy in the, like, framing of the shot. It's a really great sequence with just absolute top tier dialogue. This is like Hoshiyama Hiroyuki is very good at writing this dialogue when he has a good episode for it. And it's just, this episode just comes together so perfectly. And there's just a bunch of crazy shit. Like, I love the idea that the number one trouble consultant is this, like, super kung fu master dude who's, like, supposed to be, like has this sort of, like, heart of righteousness or whatever, who has been corrupted by this fucking crazy roulette game. And then at the end, he just uses kung fu to destroy the entire station, which is just fucking bonkers. But we also have to explain this game because it's insane and I love it. Because basically, they've got that fucking cannon, like this giant space cannon, which is a great, cool design. It looks like something out of Gundam. It
looks like they hollowed out one of the colonies from Gundam and repurposed it for their asteroid, which just, ties into my idea that you just merge the continuities and it works,
Yes. But basically, the idea is that they shoot asteroids at this dying star, and the asteroids get, like, sucked into the gravitational pull of the star, and then they land on some point of the star. And it's, like, divided up into sectors, so wherever it happens to land is your number for the roulette game, basically, instead of just having a ball go down like a roulette thing. And then if it lands on the far side of the planet, it's a 0, and if you get 00, the house wins. That's, like, the idea. And it's so fucking bonkers. But they find out basically, or learn early on, that they're just blowing up the meteors remotely using whatever the like crazy sci-fi bullshit they have, that they're like manufacturing this like liquid thingy that can blow it up with energy. But they do it close enough to the planet's surface that nobody can tell the difference. And so they're able to just rig the game that way. And it's just absolutely an insane concept. But then the piece de resistance of this episode is that you get to the very end, the fucking planet has been destroyed, like this nearby planet that people are living on, and all this shit. And you see the just horrible destruction it's wrought. And then you get the shot of the space station thingy. And then just typed onto the screen with a typewriter sound effect are the words, in translated in English, would be, and so nobody's doing it anymore. Which is the literal title of the episode. So shite daremo shinakunatta. And there's just a great comic timing to this, like, and nobody's playing this fucking roulette game anymore because it destroyed an entire planet full of people, which we're not going to think about too much.
It's the second planet full of people we have seen Yuri and Kay directly and or indirectly. This one isn't really their fault, I guess, but they have been involved in the destruction of 2 planets worth of people.
Yes. Very crazy. And last note, Mr. Kung Fu, our trouble consultant, is also voiced by Chiba Shigeru, which is, you know, that's a very good guest star to get.
And, you can't really tell until at the end when he starts doing yaas and all his crazy sounds that Chiba Shigeru is the best at.
Yes, yeah. Once the dude makes Kung Fu, like, Bruce Lee noises, that's where you're like, oh, yep, I recognize that. You can't fool me. All right, then following up that one is episode 6. What? A surprise seaside wedding panic. This one written by Hirono Yasushi, who also wrote for the original show and is also the City Hunter guy, which is what people would know him from. This is directed by and storyboarded by Yatabe Katsuyoshi. So this is the one where Yuri and Kei are investigating a Godfather-esque gang. Like, very literally, it's like supposed to be the Godfather. They have that whole scene where the Don fucking has the fucking orange peel or whatever, and he's playing with his grandkids. Like, it is explicitly, there's just, they're the Godfather people. Yuri ends up entering a relationship with the equivalent of the Michael Corleone of the family, and they ultimately decide to hold a very rushed wedding. Although, again, I've been doing Romeo and Juliet stuff, so it's not as rushed as that in some ways. But really, it's an opportunity for Kei to try to infiltrate and destroy the hideout, and like the whatever counterfeit thing that they've got going on. Ultimately, it comes out, obviously, that Yuri is doing this to manipulate Coraine / Michael Corleone, but he ultimately decides to help her escape out of love for Yuri, and he and Yuri have to say goodbye as he goes back to join his family, and she goes back to be a trouble consultant, and we're left to ponder, along with Kei, of just how serious Yuri was about the relationship all along.
Yeah, I didn't love this one. I like
this one a lot.
Okay, it didn't leave a huge impression on me. I don't have a lot of, negative to say about it. I feel, it's one of those that I just feel like the ambiguous romance sort of at the center of the episode thing, I think, is done better in other Dirty Pair places. But this one's fine. It's good. I think the Godfather references are fun. The Karen character, or however you say his name, the Mori Katsuji character is fun. And I do like the ending. I also like you've got more of Madame Beryl, who is actually one of, I think, the best additions to this season of the show. Is very good because you get some other 3WA stuff in here. So, yeah, I know you like it more than I did, so I'll let you talk about it.
Yeah, I just think this it's just got a really good energy to it. I think the comedy of the episode works really well for me. For instance, I really love Ghoulie, who gets a lot of stuff in this, because Ghoulie's not in Dirty Pair 2 all that much. But here he just gets that, worried, nervous father whose daughter's getting married, and he just doesn't know how to deal with it. And all the other people, Professor Q and Madame Beryl, show up at the wedding. There's a lot of great interactions with Kei and Yuri, where Kei is not sure exactly how serious Yuri is, and so there's just a lot of really exasperated Kei in this episode. And then I also just think it does a good job of having the relationship thing is a very light touch, right? There's a single montage that covers it. But it gives enough of a spine to the episode, especially because Yuri typically doesn't get this kind of episode. The other episodes that are a little bit more like this one are all with Kei. And so Yuri getting this kind of spotlight is fun. And it does have, I think, a great bit at the end where you have all the shit goes on. Coraine ultimately decides to help them escape. And then they have their very cliche conversation about oh, we live in different worlds and all this shit. And he jumps out of the airplane, but then he pulls his parachute, and his parachute is a picture of a rose or whatever with the words "I love you" on it, which is a really funny visual gag. I don't think this is an amazing all-time great Dirty Pair episode, but I just think it's for one of the more comedy-focused ones, I think the comedy works really well. And it makes sense to me, really, that this is written by the guy who's the the City Hunter main writer, because it's got a lot of that City Hunter quality to it without necessarily the pervy Yo Saiba, the main character, having that pervy stuff that he does that kind of drags that series down for me. It's some of the stuff I like about the comedy in City Hunter that I think gets to work better for me because I like the lead characters more. And so I think that's just some of the stuff that stands out to me about this one.
Yeah. Then you've got, the next tape would be episodes 7 and 8, and this is probably my least favorite stretch. I think both of these have interesting ideas, and neither fully worked for me. Particularly, I thought episode 7 was a weird whiff, where I think it's a great premise that goes in exactly kind of the wrong direction to me.
Yeah, I think I'd probably agree with that overall. Episode 7 is Rigged Ring, Revenge of the Muscle Lady, written by Sonata Hideki, storyboards by Nishi Fukunaga, and directed by Watanabe Shinichiro. So this is his second episode. So this is the one where you have Sandra Guts, who is a former trouble consultant who kind of failed as a trouble consultant and had bullied Yuri and Kei while they were all training. She has become the head of this drug ring that sells a drug that is a muscle enhancer, and Kei poses as an underground fighter to infiltrate, and then ultimately she has to fight Sandra while Yuri goes and tries to blow up the factory, and ultimately they blow up the factory as it's trying to escape and get away by using the power of teamwork together, because Yuri had lost the ability for eyes, Kei got her arm busted up, so Kei uses her eyes and Yuri uses her arms to shoot the rocket, and it's the the dirty pair over the dirty single. I don't know how you refer to Sandra, but she, obviously the point of the story is that because she's on her own and she only ever like operates on her own and she's selfish, she can't ever really win over the dirty pair who can triumph with the power of friendship.
So here's the thing. I think that's exactly the right point for the episode to end on. What I thought was a giant missed opportunity in this one is that you have a show that exists because of women's pro wrestling. You have a premise that is about a person doing an underground wrestling ring, basically, and you don't have a conflict where they do a big wrestling match. Like, what bugged me is that the second half of this episode is fairly generic dirty pair action fighting Sandra and trying to, like, blow up the factory and all of that stuff, and, like, it's good, it's fine, but how much more fun would this be if they, like, infiltrate, and then it's like, you know, Spider-Man 1, the cage comes down, and they have to do a cage match with Sandra, and you would arrive at the same thing at the end, where neither Kay nor Yuri can beat Sandra on their own, and Sandra, for that reason, thinks she is better than them, but Kay and Yuri put together can beat Sandra because together they are the dirty pair, they are better, they are, you know, the best. I don't really get why it became a thing about a factory, and then there's a spaceship going up and all this stuff, when, like, guys, you were called the 3WA. This is the biggest layup in the history of your show. Do a fun, like, how do Yuri and Kay fight this lady in, like, on her home turf as, like, a pro underground wrestler kind of thing. And that bugged me. It just felt like there was a very specific cool thing they could have done, and then it went in a very generic dirty pair direction to me.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with that. I don't think it particularly bugged me all that much, because I think that they execute what they do well. I do agree that there's, like, a better version of the episode that leans more into the professional wrestling angle, but it does have some pretty sick stuff. Like, I like, you know, Kay, after she busts her arm up, there's, like, this really sick shot where she comes in swinging on a rope, and she's got her, like, machine gun wrapped under her arm with, like, a sling or whatever, and she's blasting away with it as she comes in to save Yuri, who's being pinned down. There's the big, like, fight. The episode starts in medias res, where she's fighting this guy in the wrestling ring, who's hyped up on the crazy drug, and she, like, takes out, like, a little, like, brass knuckles, but they're electrified, and punches the dude into his mouth and, like, shocks him from the inside, and it's great. And she, like, licks their hand and is like ugh, afterwards, because it's covered in this dude's spittle. So it's like, there is, I think, some good stuff, and I think there's particularly a lot of good animation in this one. Like, there's a scene where Yuri is sneaking up on a couple of guys who are at this console, and then up on the screen above them, there's, like, this whole, like, giant grid of different security screens. But because they're so obsessive at looking at the match that's going on between Sandra and Kay, they don't notice that Yuri is sneaking up behind them, and she's, like, projected on all of the different screens. It's a really nice shot that would have been fairly complicated with the way that they drew it. And so there's a lot of little stuff like that. There's one point where there's a first-person camera shot from a robot drone that Yuri shoots with her guns, and when the camera is destroyed, there's a really awesome broken VHS tape effect that I think was probably just done practically, because the fidelity on it is so fucking good and real. It's so physical, and it's a great little thing. So there's, like, a lot of cool little production pieces, I think, propping up what is on the page a very generic episode. So I think I enjoyed this one a fair amount, but I don't disagree that it could have stood out more if they had leaned more into the premise.
Yeah, and again, there's stuff I like about it a lot. I do think the ending where they come together and have their final confrontation with Sandra is great. That shot of Kay swinging in with the gun is, I think, the best shot in the episode. That one's insane. There's a lot of good direction, but this is just one where it felt like we were teeing up something more special than what we got. And in episode 8, I would say we're teeing up something that we've seen before, and then we get a more boring version of it, and I don't remember almost anything about it.
Yeah, episode 8 is probably... This one actually might be my least favorite of these. Is either this or episode 1. Episode 8, This Girl Is My Elder, Sleeping Beauty, written by Tsukamoto Yumiko, who's one of the writers on the original show. Storyboards by Sadamitsu Shinya, directed by Sekita Osamu. So this is the one where they discover a little girl who is in a cryogenic capsule for 20 years after her father and everyone on board were killed on the ship. Kay tries to bond with the little girl Tia while they investigate what happened on the ship. ultimately their investigation reveals that their father's old assistant, who is now like the CEO of this big company, killed the father to get his research secrets and is now sending assassins after the girl. The dirty pair find a disc on the ship that she had been on that reveal like this dying message that reveals that evidence that that guy is the bad guy, and they ultimately confront and defeat him with the help of the little girl Tia. So this is one where it's like the script for me is like, on page, this episode is totally fine. Like a little bit generic. It feels like a couple of different episodes we had in the original show, but it's a totally fine script. Like the dynamics of the writing with Kay's relationship with the girl, all that stuff works well. There's the whole thing of her like doing this little like somersault to try to make the girl like her, and the girl doesn't care at first, but then later it becomes the thing that she uses to escape the bad guy. It's this sign of like affection between them. Like on the page, it has all the setup and all the payoff it needs, but I think this is just where the storyboarding and the animation of this episode is so flat. There's just no energy to it. It just sort of is like doing the most basic version of every single scene it does. And so I think it shows how, you need both sides of an episode, obviously, to prop it up. Like, you need both a good script, but you also need the visual execution of it to be really good. And this is one where I think one half the episode just does not hold up to scrutiny, though it feels like a production thing. Like, it looks... Like, there was a part of me watching the episode where I was almost like, was this made... Did they, like, subcontract this out to a different studio? Because it looked so poor. And it did... As far as I can tell, that is not the case. I think this is just... As the same production reach as all the other episodes, it just feels like one that just was not left in the oven for long enough by the time it came out.
Yeah, and I wouldn't even be that kind to the script. It feels like reheated leftovers from, like, the two-parter from season 1, from some of the Misnay stuff in Affair of Nolandia. It's just every dynamic in it is familiar to me, and, like, certainly, if it were better directed and animated, you could make a more, energetic version of that story, and I wouldn't care as much, but I don't think this would ever be a particularly great episode of Dirty Pair. Unlike episode 9, which is my favorite of Dirty Pair 2, yes. Let's talk about Slaughter Squad, Red-Eyed Hell Signal.
Yes. So this episode, written by Hironoyashi, storyboards by Yatabe Katsuyoshi, directed by Watanabe Shinichiro, Mr. Cowboy Bebop. So this is the one where you have a mysterious group of 5 different soldiers who are prolonging a conflict on this planet between the government and a group of rebels on the planet. The Dirty Pair are brought in by the government to investigate. The Dirty Pair meet up with the rebels and find one of the soldiers, this mysterious group of soldiers who have been injured, and they bring him back to base. They discover that he is experimented on and brainwashed, and that his name is Mick Murphy, and he is a soldier who is kidnapped from a different planet. He tells the Dirty Pair that the arms merchant Mazuho has been using the group to prolong conflicts and profit by selling weapons to both sides, and he has done this on other planets before. The other soldiers attack, and McMurphy sacrifices himself to protect one of the child soldiers of the rebels. Yuri and Kay defeat the rest of the squad, and then lay an ambush for Mazuho in space. And that's where the episode leaves off, with a very strong implication that they murder the ever-living shit out of this dude.
But, like, this is one where you giving the plot description just does not even come close to doing it justice, because this is like, the opposite of what you were describing with the last episode, where everything I think in this one comes from the style, from the pacing, from the storyboarding. It is just top-notch across the board. Particularly, like, this is one where the ending, and I would define the ending as basically the moment where McMurphy sacrifices himself to the end, is so good that I think it elevates what was already a very strong episode, because the weight of where it ends is so heavy that it immediately made me want to go back and, like, rewatch it again. I didn't have time to do that, but, like, there's a real richness to this one. And you have basically the McMurphy sacrifice sequence. Then you have the final shootout with Kay and Yuri, where there's someone on both sides of them. And it's basically a John Woo scene where everyone just empties their bottomless guns. And there's a lot of cuts. And then at the end, Kay and Yuri are standing. And then they go into space and basically do a Char from the end of Mobile Suit Gundam blasting Kaisulia Zabi, but without us actually seeing the final blasting. And oh my god, it's not narratively similar, but it has a similar impact as episode 8 from the original series, which is the prison break one, where it ends with them about to go do more Dirty Pair stuff. But in this case, it is, we found a guy so fucking evil that we are wholly justified in murdering the fuck out of him And it just ends with that, because of course Kei and Yuri are going to get the job done. We don't need to see it. The end of the story is them being pushed to a place where they are that fucking angry. Oh my god. This should have been the last episode, because I don't think the next one, 10, I didn't like really much at all. And I think if this had been like the end of Dirty Pair 2, oh my god, what a mic drop.
Yeah, it's phenomenal. The production of it is particularly really good. I like you shout out that shootout at the end where they're fighting off the guys on either side of them. And yeah, the editing of it's just so perfect. These cuts to get that impact. It also like feels like a Sergio Leone shootout from like one of his Western movies. Like the editing is just so tight and so perfect to communicate the violence of this like brutal shootout between them and those two of the soldiers. Like, it's also just, it's a really brutal episode because most of the guest characters die, but in this case, not because the Dirty Pair accidentally blows up the planet at the end. They just get murdered kind of casually. Like, there's the one guy who's the head of the rebels who just gets a bullet through his head when the, modified soldiers attack their camp. He just gets shot, and then it just moves on. Like, there's a casualness to the violence that I think is quite impactful. That obviously is, part of that Vietnam movie kind of energy it's got going on. One thing that's interesting is when I was reading that interview with Katsuyoshi, before I was watching Dirty Pair 2, I read through all that interview. And one part of the interview, he was talking about that there was one rule that he'd been given by Takachiya, the creator of the light novels, where he said that one of the rules for Dirty Pair is that Yuri and Kei don't shoot first, in a Han Solo type thing, right? Like, they have to be provoked before they kill someone. But he wanted to break that rule, and that was kind of the idea for part of the concept of the episode, was them creating a bad guy in the episode so awful that it would justify them just murdering this guy, like, unprovoked in the sense of, like, he's not fighting back. They just lay an ambush for him and fucking blow him up with a rocket launcher in space. And I think that, just, they nail that quality to the episode. It adds such a powerful component to the story that does set it apart from other Dirty Pair episodes, because none of the other Dirty Pair episodes have that dynamic to it. And it makes that ending particularly striking, because the other thing the ending does is it does the full-on Dezaki Osamu style freeze frames, the postcard moment idea of like these super detailed freeze frames on multiple of the characters, and then it ends on the McMurphy's picture of his family that he has, and you have that postcard moment of that freeze frame of that done in super high detail, and that's the last thing you see in the episode while you hear the sounds of the explosions going off in the background. It's just a perfect fucking ending.
Yes, and I like the whole storyboarding of that sequence where they come down from their spaceship, so we see them kind of float down, and Yuri and Kei are in total sync, but they're completely wordless, they're not talking at all, and they have their bazookas, and as they're getting ready, they pick up the picture of McMurphy and his family, and they let it kind of float off, and then they like get ready to fire. Oh man, it's intense, it's amazing. It's the one where I feel like, I know he didn't storyboard any of these, but I do feel like the most of Watanabe Shinichiro's style in this one, like if you look at some of his later work, the animation on the planet where they're basically illustrating, it's a very Vietnam-esque scenario that they're showing. It's got this very gritty style that does remind me a little bit of 08 The Mess Team, which would be after this, but also Sunrise. Just an incredible episode.
Yeah, great episode. We do have a couple of good guest stars for that one. You've got Ishimaru Hiroya is McMurphy. He was Agrippa Maintainer in Turn A Gundam. Always a great name. It's just fun to say, Agrippa Maintainer. He is Odin Kozuki in One Piece. I threw that in for you, Jonathan. I don't know what the fuck that is, but it's
very important character, like actually vital character to the Wano arc, and a really good performance. So good yeah.
But the thing that he would be by far most famous of is he is Koji Kabuto, who's the main character in Mazinger Z. So if you look up this guy's filmography, you just see 1,000 like Mazinger Z, OVAs, movies, games, like he's just in everything. But he's very good here as McMurphy. And then we have the return of Takiguchi Junpei as Masaho, who we saw him last time because he was Father Mahogany, a character who almost has the exact same character design as Masaho. That's the crazy mob leader guy who is also like a priest from the Dirty Pair episode with the con man and all that shit from the last one. That's the guy who's also Uranai Baba in Dragon Ball, Gudu in Dragon Ball Z, and then countless one-off baddies in Lupin the Third. And we talked about how he's that dude in all these episodes, and he is that dude in this episode as well. And he's really good at playing this fucking absolute scumbag character. Like, if you want to make a character that justifies your leads ambushing him and murdering him out of nowhere, you just get this guy to play him, and he's very good at it.
Absolutely.
All right, and that leads us to episode 10, Evil Speaks for Itself. Space Truckers, written by Hoshiyama Hiroyuki, storyboards by Nishi Fukunaga, directed by Sekita Osamu. So this is where we've got the Dirty Pair as space truckers who are working with a group of independent truckers that their trucks are being mysteriously attacked, and all their business being poached by a massive conglomerate called the Universal Company. And they can't work, so Yuri and Kei decide to investigate. Ultimately, they befriend two of the truckers, Jade and Mash, and then while they're investigating these attacks, they're brought in by the police. They discover the whole thing is a conspiracy between the police and the Universal Company. And ultimately, Yuri and Kei just basically murder everybody involved with this, because they do kill both the CEO of the Universal Company and the police chief of this area. And then one of the guys, Jade, who's one of the truckers, he had been... basically he had murdered a guy in self-defense and had been on the run, and he had the statute of limitations was just about to come up, and they ultimately decided to let that guy go away, even though it's because they ultimately miscalculated when that statute of limitations would go up because of the planetary whatever happening.
Yeah, there's stuff I like in this episode. Overall, it didn't do much for me, and the ending kind of rubbed me the wrong way.
Yes,
I think it's a theoretically funny joke, but it feels wholly out of character, because Yuri and Kei would absolutely let that guy go. They let guys go like that all the time. They do not care. If they like you, they're going to let you go. And then this, it also felt like a really weird way to end this mini-series, these 10 episodes, on this note of them being, really selfish and abrasive. So that kind of drove it down for me. There's some good moments in it, but overall I found this to be a pretty bog-standard episode of Dirty Pair without a lot to distinguish it.
Yeah, I liked the episode overall. Other than I agree with you, the ending, it felt like they're just trying to be too clever.
Yes.
I don't think the intention was to make it feel like Yuri and Kei are being awful about it, but I think they just wanted to add in an extra twist when they didn't need it. The twist of them just letting the guy go away is more than enough. But there is stuff I like the space truckerness of it. I like the ridiculous giant space truck with the audacious fucking garish lights that Yuri and Kei have. I like their outfits in this. Jade and Mash have really good fucking designs. And I do like the whole storyline until they throw kind of water on it at the end. But the whole thing of Jade being this guy who's a fugitive from the law, but is not an awful person, who the only place he has to go is this kind of independent backwater company. This is the only way that he can make a living. And fucking Space Amazon coming in and crushing that shit and using state violence to help them do it. How that pushes people who are marginalized like that, who have records and things like that, and it makes it so they have nowhere to live in the world. I think that is a cool plot, and it's got a couple of good moments that hit on that. Again, it kind of fucks it up at the very, very end, which is frustrating, but a lot of the stuff in the middle part of the episode I think does a really good job of building up that idea.
Yeah, I think I agree about the aesthetic. I like the truckerness of it, but yeah, I just don't have a lot to say about this one. I think particularly I watched this back-to-back with episode 9, and it felt like a bit of a come-down after that, I have to say.
Sure, yeah, I definitely don't think it's as good as episode 9. I also don't think that they were conceptualizing these as and this is the finale of Dirty Pair 2. I think they were conceptualizing these as these are all just volumes that are coming out. I don't think they're thinking of this as a season finale in any way.
Although it does have, as you note in your notes, a callback to the finale of the first show, where Yuri gets that kiss-off line before she blasts the Nazi guy. She goes, bye-bye, and then this time Kei gets it before killing the police dude. Which, it is. There is a feel-good aspect to them, killing the chief of police and the CEO of Space Amazon. So I'm into that, but yeah.
Yeah. You do have two good guest stars here. Sakai Osamu plays Jade, the old guy. He's good at playing old guys because he is Grandpa Gohan from Dragon Ball. He is Old Chessman from Sailor Moon R. I don't remember who that was, but I just saw that credit, and I liked the idea of playing a guy named Old Chessman. And then he's Adamaki Daisuke is probably the most notable character he's played in many ways, who's the chief from Ghost of the Shell, who's in all those episodes. He's in the movie and the standalone complex. And then Kikuchi Masami is Mash, the young trucker dude with the great fucking hat and all that shit. He's Ino from Gundam Double Zeta, who's just one of the buddies in that show. He's Tenchi Masaki from Tenchi Muyo. That's the main character of Tenchi Muyo. And he's also Monaka, the weird little alien dude with giant nipples from Dragon Ball Super. I don't know if people remember him, but that's who that dude was.
Indeed. So that's Dirty Pair 2. It's, I think it is more uneven than the original show, but at its best, there's certainly a lot that is worth adding to the Dirty Pair canon. And if we haven't said it enough, other than a couple of episodes, it is gorgeous as a production. It looks incredible. This is definitely, peak OVA era, where, what you were getting on these tapes was the best of the best, and some of the animation in these episodes is mind-blowing.
Yes, absolutely, yeah. The production, with the exception of, 1 or 2 episodes, is very, very good. And overall, it's a little bit up and down, but it's just it's fun to get more Dirty Pair,
Yes.
I'm very happy to have these episodes. But we have one last OVA to talk about today. We have Flight 005 Conspiracy, which is our 1990 OVA. This one is directed and storyboarded by Takizawa Toshifumi, who is the original director for the original show for Dirty Pair. The unit director is Takamatsu Shinji, who did a bunch of Dirty Pair 2 episodes. And then also he's the guy who goes on to do a bunch of those Yusha Super Robot shows. I don't think he would have done any of them at this point, though. And the script for this one is Suzuki Yoshitake, who, again, very small world on our grand tour, because we have talked about this man before, because he started at Bushi Pro. He was one of the people alongside Sugigi Zaburo and Dezaki Osamu, amongst others, to start the little company Art Fresh, which is the one that made Dororo 1968, alongside Mushi Production. And he was one of the main figures on Dororo. Specifically, he was one of that kind of group of creators on the show that took over after Sugi left that director role, and he is also the guy who wrote the lyrics to Dororo's song. So we have had at Dirty Pair, we've had the lady who sang it, and we have had the guy who wrote it. So all of Dororo's song come together in Dirty Pair somehow. He later joined Sunrise in 1972, which is how obviously he eventually ends up on this. He worked on a large number of projects at Sunrise as one of the head writers for the Yusha series of shows. He also worked with Tono on Zambot 3 and Combat Mecha Zabungle. So we will talk about Suzuki Yoshitake again in the future. But it is just always amazing to me how these names keep coming up. Character design, chief animation director, once again, Dokite Tsukasa, because you got to get him in there. And then music for this one is Okada Toru. Okada was a prolific musician, composer, and music producer, working on a huge number of anime, movies, games, all kinds of stuff. A lot more kind of live action than anime, but he did lots of other anime as well. He also worked alongside a lot of bands doing composing of music, but also producing lots of music for a large number of different bands. And I think the music in this OVA is quite good as well. A little bit different than the other ones, but it fits well, I think, in the musical world of Dirty Pair.
Yes, and I don't love this one, but I do like it, and I think it comes the closest to doing the Dirty Pair story at longer than 22 minutes thing. Yes. Well. I think there is still some pacing. I think it could stand to be a little shorter. I think the final half hour, especially once it gets kind of frenetic with the action, gets a little long in the tooth, and I think the ending feels a little underdeveloped. I wish there was a denouement moment at the end. But overall, moving into, again, it is more of kind of a long-form mystery. It's got a lot of moving pieces. It definitely fills in that, like I said earlier, that sort of Patrick Willems theory of the vibes movie. This is very much that, where it's got a lot of locations. It's got the characters doing a lot of cool things. Could I tell you one single thing about the story and, how it all works together? No, I could not. It's convoluted in a way that I'm not following, but that's fine. It is actually fairly true to film noir in that way, where
yes.
A Raymond Chandler book or something, no, you are not coming out of that giving a, in-depth summary of what happened, but the mood and atmosphere work well enough. And particularly the turn around the middle of the episode where Dick gets got, and no, not Dick, Danny. Sorry, Danny yes.
Dick gets got at the end. This one is Danny that dies.
Yeah, where Danny gets got right as Kay is mourning the apparent death of Yuri, and then Yuri comes back in. That moment is so fucking good, it elevates the whole thing.
Yes. Yeah, this episode is very interesting because it does, as said in my notes here, it feels like a redux, or a mulligan on the two-parter from the original show, where the broad strokes of the plot are kind of similar, because both that two-parter and this are about this plane that has mysteriously disappeared, and there's these questions of the people who are on it, were there people on it, were there not? There's a lot of those elements of the plot that are vaguely similar, but where that two-parter just fell totally flat because I think it couldn't figure out how to fill the time. This one I think is much better at figuring out how to fill out that space by turning it into this film noir-esque kind of detective story thing, where it's, you've got these like 3 different planets, and there's this like science guy and who was like on one side, and then he flipped to the other side, but he's going to the 3rd planet. There's a neutral party, and there's like insurance companies and like a scandal with the insurance companies that's involved, and that's why they're investigating, because like, why has no one called for the insurance, right? Like, it feels like that kind of, like Raymond Chandler would be a good, Maltese Falcon, Chinatown, like any of those kinds of stories or movies. Like, it very much is doing that kind of thing where it's just like slow burn mystery where Yuri and Kay are so thrown in the middle of this big conspiracy that is so convoluted that like it's just kind of impossible to untie. And so they're just sort of piecing it together, and they only start to realize how dire it is once this like horrible thing happens, which in this case is Danny's head exploding. And I just think that this, like, it's not like the best Dirty Pair thing ever, but I think it does a very credible job of doing that kind of storyline, putting it into the world of Dirty Pair and making it work. I would agree that I think once you get to the ending and they're on the space station, that part goes on too long, and that part could be tightened up a bit more. But the whole build up to it and the slow burn nature of the plot, like, I thought they did a really excellent job at, and it just feels like a nice do-over for this 2-parter that, when it's, this is not the guy who directed those specific episodes, but he was the director on the show at the time. And you have to wonder if there is like an intentional, those 2 episodes are clearly a pain point in the production of that original show. It makes you wonder if there was a sense of like, I'd like to come back and take another shot at this bigger picture, longer form Dirty Pair story, because it's, this is a little bit longer than that 2-parter, but it's a similar length to what that 2-parter is. And so it feels like him just kind of wanting to come back and do that properly.
Yes, and I think it is a very convincing version of this sort of thing. It makes really good use of Kay and Yuri, obviously. Yes. The guest cast is pretty good. Yes, overall, like, particularly if you compare this to the other feature-length OVA, Affair of Nolandia, this is much, much stronger, both in animation and I just think in general storytelling and style. And yeah, I think before it gets a little long in the tooth at the end, I would have said I was like super into this. And I think it sapped some of my enthusiasm near the end, where it just gets a little too long in the tooth. But overall, like, if you're a Dirty Pair fan, 100% you should watch this. It's very, very satisfying on that level. Even if it's a bit of a bummer that this is the last thing we have with like this cast,
Yes. Yeah. It is really kind of funny that even though this was made in 1990, compared to Affair of Nolandia, like, it feels like it fits into that original show and the vision of that original show. So clearly, obviously, it's the same director. So it's like, it makes sense that it feels like the style of that original show kind of coming back, which is fun. But yeah, I think the animation of this is really good. There's a lot of really great animated moments. Like, there's a giant explosion at one of the factories early on that I think is like a really, really good anime explosion. There's a big car chase at the middle where Mugi comes in The Lovely Angel, and kind of like blows them all up, but there's like just a big insane car chase. You have the whole scene where all the fucking like secret police have Yuri tied up in a chair, and is like interrogating her, and then Kay comes in like a little fucking, it looks like the little helicopter thing you had in Far Cry 4 that you shot grenades from. Just like this little tiny helicopter. She just fucks all those dudes up. She jumps in. She just fucking picks up Yuri, still trying the chair. So she has like the whole chair, fucking picks it up over her shoulder and just sprints down the hallway. There's just an amazing shot of like Yuri in her hair like swinging as she's dangling from the back of this chair, while Kay is just manhandling her. And it's like, man, where was this Kay in the fucking Dirty Pair movie? She would have kicked that Carson D. Carson's ass. Like, she's just like does some pretty badass shit in this special. So there's just a lot of really good little bits and pieces like that I think elevate the whole thing.
And again, that moment where Danny dies.
Oh,
I
it's
just
crazy.
have to like stress again. It is, because you see the like bartender put something in Kay's drink. But you expect that to be something like she's going to get knocked out. Right, yeah. And that'll be bad, but like, she's not going to die. No one's going to die from this. It's not just that, and even if she were to die, it would be like foaming at the mouth poisoned. No, Danny drinks it, and then Kay's face is covered in blood, and they never show his exploded head, but there's a lot of very judicious storyboarding and editing to make it very clear that man has no head anymore. It is completely gone. And then at that moment is also when Yuri comes back in, guns a-blazing, like a completely electric moment, unbelievable, very much made me sit up in my seat like, what the fuck? Because you are just not expecting it.
Yeah, and that's like, that's like, you need that kind of moment in your film noir detective story where things have been sort of blasé. You're like, oh, there's some insurance, or it's like, it's the water rights or whatever. It's like you're at this like sort of like very company level of conspiracy, and then all of a sudden someone's fucking gets shot or their head blows up or whatever. You're like, oh fuck, no, this is like serious. And then Yuri and Kay become very like invested, very like personally in what's happening because Danny was a nice dude, like he's like there's a great, they humanize him really well where Moogie is great. Moogie's all over this one. There's lots of great Moogie animation, but there's all this stuff early on where all the different random people that Yuri and Kay are interviewing are freaked the fuck out by Moogie. But then when Danny meets Moogie, he's like a little like, about him. But then like he starts petting with Moogie and kind of playing with him. And while he's talking with Yuri and Kay, like he sticks his hand out and Moogie puts his paw in his hand. And so they like do a good job of making you really like this dude pretty quickly. And so then when his fucking head explodes out of nowhere, you're like, no, Danny, God, why, Danny? Shit. It's great. You do also have a good voice cast here because Danny is voiced by Horiichi Kinyu, who around this time would have been Mashimer Cello from Double Zeta Gundam. He's also
my
Samson.
Boy.
Yes.
Sorry.
He's also Sanson in Nadia the Secret of Blue Water. He's one of my favorite characters of that show. He's very funny. He's Jamil Neat in After War Gundam X. He's Pain.
My other boy.
Yes. Our little Amuro all grown up in After War Gundam X. He's Pain in Naruto. He's not really my boy. That's the guy who fucking blows up the fucking village hidden in the leaves, which is insane. And then I put One Piece in here. I don't know who this guy is. He's Kinemon in One Piece. I don't know what that is.
Actually, Kinemon is one of the main characters for like over 10 years of the anime because he's there from Punk Hazard through Wano, and he's a major character. And Horiuchi's really good in that, and you can tell they got a heavy for him for that reason because Horiuchi is a big name, as you can tell from all those credits.
Yes, but they didn't only get a heavy for Danny. They also did for Dick, the other co-star, our old man here, because you got Nayagoro, who is
my boy.
But yes, he is Zenigata. He is fucking Zenigata. And I love Dick's introduction. I just love that he's named Dick, and so you just have UDK saying Dick all the time. I know it's dumb, but it makes me cackle. It's like
it's done in such a way that there's no way they weren't thinking about that. Like they have some sentences where Yuri and Kay say some things about Dick that just make you chortle like a child. And you know what? That's okay. The show is called Dirty Pair. We can have fun with it.
But I do love there's just a really great line that Nayagoro just pulls off so well when they actually meet Dick, and he saves them and like gets them in that truck or whatever. He takes off the helmet and they meet him for the first time. And he, they're like a little bit thrown off by how kind of old he is. And he says like, oh, naka naka shibuidaro. It's like, it's like, oh, aren't they such, it's kind of hard to translate. It's like, aren't such like a charming old man? Like shibui is like something that's very like sophisticated in that kind of old fashioned way. And Yuri and Kay give this very like expression to this because it's like he's this like he's grandpa, right? And he's very literally grandpa because he's doing this to save his granddaughter and daughter. But he is not your sort of suave like silver fox is kind of like what Shibuya, you describe that kind of like a silver fox kind of thing. And Nayagoro just says that line with such confidence. It's great. And like Yuri and Kay's reaction, it cracked me up. So Dick, he was a real one. I was sad when Dick died. He should have. That's if there's one criticism I make, Dick should have been saved at the end. Like I thought it kind of sucked that the lovely angel doesn't come in and Moogie saves him or something. It feels like a little much that Dick doesn't make it all the way through at the end of the piece.
Yes, Carson D. Carson should have stayed dead at the end of Project Eden, but Dick should have been brought back because it feels like, because the moment where they Yuri is trying to get him and he falls out of her grasp and then he's gone, it's brutal, but it's brutal in the way where you expect that there will then be a Deus Ex Machina, but one that is earned because Dick was such a good, character who was wholesome in life. And I don't think like the ending is like fleshed out enough to earn that. Like it feels like there needed to be a slightly different denouement if he's dead than just kind of the hard cut to credits that we get, if that makes sense. So yeah, I think they should have brought Dick back. More Dick.
Yeah, we're big fans of Dick on this podcast. I think is the thing we can both confidently say.
Well, Sean, anything else to say about Dirty Pair? I am so glad you suggested this for this season and that we got to do all of it. We got to do all the original Dirty Pair stuff. And, you know, it's not all perfect, but that's okay. The messiness sometimes is part of the fun. And when it is at its best, there's just nothing else like it. Definitely, I think this goes up on the shelf next to stuff like Lupin the Third in terms of fun, episodic anime with a major attitude that I will be revisiting frequently in the future. I love this show.
Yeah, I really enjoyed just the opportunity to rewatch it again because it wasn't that long ago since I watched it, and I was surprised by even though it was only a few years ago, rewatching it again so quickly, it was like it just holds up to that level of rewatch ability so well that I'm sure I'll probably be watching it again a couple years from now. Yes, and it's just even when you get some of the stuff in part 2 that we covered today, the second set of OVAs and movies and stuff, not all of them are as good as that original show was, but so much of it is, and then stuff like the movie just kind of exists in its own dimension as this incredible thing that stands on its own. Like the world of Dirty Pair is a very rich one. Like I said at the top of the episode, I would be really curious and interested to see Sunrise come back to this franchise and do something different with it. Like I think it's, it makes sense to me that the original light novel author had the idea of Dirty Pair is malleable enough. You can do your ninja Dirty Pair in the fucking Tokugawa Shogunate, right? Like that I think is an interesting idea. But also those novels have never actually been adapted. So I'd be very, very interested to see Dirty Pair come back in our obsessive nostalgia reboots of all the things to bring back. I think Dirty Pair would be one that I would be very interested to see. But regardless if they bring it back or not. Yes.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say, do you have fantasy casting for who would play Yuri and Kei now? Because I had one thought, which is that I don't know about Kei, but I would do Hayami Saori as Yuri. That would be very funny.
I had that when you said who would play them. Hayami Saori is at a kind of immediate, yes, for Yuri. Yeah, you'd have to get someone who mostly plays young boys to be Kei, and I feel like I'd have to sit down and think about that for a while. But yes, regardless, they should bring Dirty Pair back. But even if they don't, the whole Dirty Pair is always there. Hopefully that fucking American English Blu-ray comes out at some point, because I would just love for more people to be able to watch the show without having to jump through crazy hoops or find awful, terrible torrents that just make it look like it fucking was colored with MS Paint or some bullshit. Like some of the torrents I saw when you told me you were having a hard time, I was like, oh yeah, there's some bad ones out there.
They're bad, yeah.
Yeah, that's frustrating. The show is just so good. I hope it becomes more accessible in the future. But Jonathan, our grand tour is not done yet. Do you want to share with the audience, what are we doing next?
Well, in episode 7 of Dirty Pair 2, we had a character named Sandra Guts. And next week, we are going to be learning about the adventures of her older brother, Guts, in Berserk, the Swordwind romance from 1997. This is the original anime adaptation of Miura Kentaro's amazing manga, Berserk, specifically adapting the Golden Age arc of the manga over 25 episodes from the same studio that brought you Pokemon the same year, which is one of the greatest historical confluences ever. We are going to be watching one of the greatest anime ever made, the original Berserk. It's been highly requested. It's had a recent Blu-ray release by Discotech that has led to kind of a rediscovery of the show, and I just love it to death. And I'm very excited to talk about Sandra's big brother Guts next time on Japanimation Station.
Well, you can catch here next time. Finally, the people who some people have been asking us to cover this since we've been doing Weekly Suit Gundam. The time has finally arrived. We are doing Berserk.